Chapter 3090. Deviant Ghost Runye Tian frowned when he saw the Rakshasa's figure on the platform. His face stiffened, but his eyes were filled with killing intent and unconcealable excitement. He had not expected his opponent to be so strong in the first battle of the top 64. It seems the first battle won't be easy. Nye Tian looked at Yen Wuyu, the corner of his mouth twitching as he smiled bitterly in his heart. He really wanted to kill Yen Wuyu, but the first battle was very important to him. If he used up too much of his strength in the first battle, or exposed too many of his trump cards, it would be very disadvantageous for him in the following battles. Among the top 64, Yen Wuyu's strength was definitely in the top 10, or even the top 5. Although Nye Tian's strength was not the strongest in everyone's eyes, he was definitely not weak either. Feng Shudong had said that the top 64 would avoid the stronger ones in the first battle. It was obvious that the first battle between Nye Tian and Yen Wuyu was carefully planned. Nye Tian, how far do you think you'll make it to the top 64? Heaven's Chosen Honorable looked at Nye Tian from high up in the sky. Her lips curled into a playful smile. She had arranged all of Nye Tian's battles personally, and every opponent was strong. She had arranged for Yen Wuyu to be Nye Tian's first opponent. She did not expect Yen Wuyu to defeat Nye Tian, but she hoped that Yen Wuyu could force Nye Tian to use his strongest trump card. She had long noticed that after Nye Tian came out of the Doomsday Forest, there was a very strong heavenly energy in his body. Furthermore, this heavenly energy had perfectly fused with his martial physique. In her opinion, this was simply an impossible matter. Heavenly energy came from the heavenly sacred heart, and in this world, apart from the owner of the heavenly sacred heart, no one could control the heavenly energy. Why was Nye Tian able to fuse the heavenly energy so perfectly? This was something that the Heaven's Chosen Honorable could not understand. The devilish energy of Yen Wuyu's deviant ghost devil infant was very dense, and it clashed with the power of the heavenly Tao. It was the perfect opportunity to test Nye Tian. The Heaven's Chosen One really wanted to see what was going on with the power of the heavenly law in Nye Tian's body. At this moment, Nye Tian's body moved. He soared into the air and landed on the fighting ring. Heavenly monster Nye Tian. Seeing Nye Tian's figure appear, everyone couldn't help but exclaim in shock. No one had expected Yen Wuyu's opponent to be Nye Tian. Yen Wuyu was an expert, and this was only the first battle of the top 64. His opponent should have been a weakling, so why was it Nye Tian? But in the next moment, most people's eyes blazed as they began to discuss in low voices. Who would have thought that Yen Wuyu's opponent would actually be Nye Tian? Seems like the battle this time around will be very intense. Yeah, the first battle of the top 64, a head-on battle between two experts. I'm looking forward to it. Lord Heaven's Chosen One made a bet with Nye Tian, so he definitely doesn't want Nye Tian to become the Heaven's Chosen Star Chief. I think this battle was arranged by Lord Heaven's Chosen One. Shoo! Are you tired of living? How can you say such things? If Lord Heaven's Chosen One and Lord Heaven's Chosen Envoy heard this, even if you had 100 lives, it wouldn't be enough. The crowd discussed as they looked at the fighting ring with more and more excitement. Nye Tian. On the fighting ring, when Yen Wuyu saw that his opponent was actually Nye Tian, he couldn't help but cry out in joy. His eyes were filled with ferocity, like a wolf that had seen its prey. He didn't expect that his first opponent would actually be Nye Tian. Previously, Nye Tian had shown his killing intent towards him. Now that the two of them were going to fight so soon, he felt inexplicably excited. Make your move. Nye Tian's reaction was very calm. His lips curled into a cold smile as he said directly, "Since you are so eager to die, I'll fulfill your wish." Yen Wuyu sneered coldly. The excitement in his eyes instantly turned into intense killing intent. His body trembled as terrifying black runes appeared all over his body. Those runes instantly turned into terrifying demonic chi, circling around his body. The baleful aura was dense, fierce, and evil. Nye Tion's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw this scene. Those black runes should be the deviant ghost runes that Yuluo mentioned. Yuluo had once told him that the first step of refining a deviant ghost demon infant was to fuse the infant with the deviant ghost runes to refine it into a demon infant. Furthermore, only 1 in 10,000 infants could become a demon infant. The rest were all sacrifices. Nye Tian originally thought that the deviant ghost runes wouldn't be too strong, but the aura of the deviant ghost runes around Yan Wuyu made him feel threatened. No wonder it was so difficult to successfully refine a demon infant. Little brat, die. At this moment, the corner of Yan Wuyu's mouth twitched. His eyes turned cold and his figure moved. He struck out with his palm, and the deviant ghost runes on his body instantly condensed. Boom! In the next instant, a sinister ghost claw formed from the deviant ghost runes appeared in the air. A baleful aura was released in the air. The oppressive aura was suffocating. What kind of power is this? Why is it so terrifying? The crowd couldn't help but exclaim when they felt the baleful aura in the air. The baleful aura was extremely oppressive, making people feel suffocated. On the battle stage, Nye Tion's eyes narrowed as he retreated. The sinister ghost claw wasn't strong, but the aura it exuded was extremely terrifying. Boom! As he retreated, Starlight Heaven Slash appeared in his hand. He slashed out with his sword and an enormous sword pressure appeared, causing the space to sink. The sword's shadow was like a dragon that rushed out. Boom! In the next instant, the sinister ghost claw collided with the sword's shadow and shattered. However, the deviant ghost runes didn't dissipate after dispersing in the air. Instead, they spread towards Nye Tian. In an instant, Nye Tian was enveloped by the deviant ghost runes, causing him to feel extremely oppressive. Nye Tian frowned and the 9 yuan meridians in his body revolved crazily. An enormous amount of dragon energy surged out of his body like a raging wave, crashing against the deviant ghost runes. However, the deviant ghost runes were like maggots in one's bones. The enormous amount of dragon energy was unable to disperse them. Nye Tian, the power of the deviant ghost runes isn't something you can imagine. Once you are sucked in, you won't be able to get rid of them. Yan Wuyu looked at Nye Tian with a murderous gaze and said in a deep voice, "Hiss!" The crowd outside the battle stage couldn't help but gasp when they saw this scene. No one had expected such a scene to unfold before their eyes. Yan Wuyu didn't even use his demonic infant. Was Nye Tian going to lose? This person is indeed terrifying. It seems like Nye Tian is going to die in his hands. In the void, Shadowflame Ruinous Star's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself, Nye Tian, it seems like I overestimated you. Chapter 3091. The formation of the heavenly path. The scene on the fighting stage caused everyone's eyes to tremble and their expressions to change. Yan Wuyu's palm was extremely powerful. Once it landed, Nye Tian would be severely injured even if he didn't die. Nye Tian. The Rakshasa Saintess, Yuluo's eyes flickered. Her heart sank and her face tightened. It was obvious that she was extremely nervous. Even she was curious as to why she was so nervous about Nye Tian. Fengqi, Si Xiaoye, and the others were also extremely nervous and worried. On the other hand, Emo was extremely calm. He believed in Nye Tian's strength. "Ha, you're dead for sure," Yan Wuyu roared. His face contorted as if he could already see the scene of Nye Tian being killed with a single palm. Roar! However, at that moment, Nye Tian's body trembled and a violent dragon chi was unleashed. A dragon's roar resounded in the air. "Trying to kill me with mere ghost runes? You've underestimated me." At the same time, Nye Tian's voice sounded. Following that, a violent sword shadow appeared. It was 10,000 meters long, causing the air to tremble. Boom! Bang bang bang! Then, the palm and the sword collided in the air. Two terrifying forces collided with each other, causing a thunderous explosion in the air. The palm shadow was instantly torn apart and shattered. The sudden scene caused Yen Wuyu's eyes to tremble. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Then, the huge sword came crashing down like a stormy sea. He wanted to dodge, but it was too late. He could only forcefully thrust his palm forward. Bang! In the next moment, Yen Wuyu was sent flying with a dull thud. When he landed on the stage, he left a 10-meter-long bloody mark on the stage. This scene caused everyone's expression to freeze. They were so shocked that they couldn't utter a single word. Nie Tian was clearly engulfed by the ghost runes. Why did he suddenly unleash such a powerful force? Shadow Flame Ruinous Star exclaimed in shock. He also didn't understand how Nie Tian could suddenly break free. Not to mention him, even the top experts in the sky had gloomy and confused expressions. They did not know what was going on. What's going on? How did that kid get rid of the deviant ghost runes? At this moment, the one who was the most shocked was the Rakshasa king. It screamed in horror, and the Rakshasa mask on its face was trembling. He knew very well how terrifying the deviant ghost runes were. Yen Wuyu might only have the strength of a third-order pseudo-sage, but his control over the phantom runes had reached the point of perfection. Even a sixth-order pseudo-sage expert might not be able to escape from his phantom runes. On the other hand, Nie Tian was only a rank 9 demi-saint. How could he have gotten rid of the runes? How is this possible? On the stage, Yen Wuyu steadied his body and let out a strange cry of shock. There was a trace of fear in his eyes as he looked at Nie Tian. He had never thought that Nie Tian would be able to break free of the deviant ghost runes' control in an instant. From his point of view, this was simply impossible. In the next moment, Yen Wuyu seemed to have realized something. His eyes trembled as he screamed in horror, "Impossible!" What happened? Everyone was confused when they saw this. They did not know what was going on. Nothing is impossible. Nie Tian stood with his hands behind his back and smiled calmly. How is this possible? Yen Wuyu looked at Nie Tian, and the fear on his face became even more obvious. Even his voice was trembling as he asked, "How could you have fused with my deviant ghost runes?" He could not believe his eyes. Nie Tian did not get rid of the deviant ghost runes. Instead, he had directly fused them into his body. The power of the deviant ghost runes was violent and evil. Yen Wuyu had cultivated for hundreds of years before he could control them. Yet, Nie Tian dared to directly absorb the deviant ghost runes without any damage to his martial body. It was just too strange. It's just the deviant ghost runes. What's there to be afraid of? Nie Tian raised an eyebrow with a faint smile. His eyes were filled with disdain. The deviant ghost runes are indeed terrifying. It's just that your formation of heavenly Tao is stronger. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out with a smug smile. The reason why Nie Tian dared to absorb the deviant ghost runes was because of the power of the formation of heavenly Tao. The formation of heavenly Tao contained a powerful force of the heavenly Tao and 9 heavenly shackles. It was extremely terrifying. Moreover, the force of the heavenly Tao had an absolute suppression against the deviant ghost runes. Not only did Nie Tian's absorption of the deviant ghost runes not harm his martial body, but he was also able to fuse the power of the runes into the formation of heavenly Tao and use it for his own purposes. Nie Tian, you are too arrogant. At that moment, Yen Wuyu calmed down. A cold look appeared in his eyes as he extended his palm. A vortex of demon chi appeared in his palm as he said in a cold voice, Nie Tian, you forced me to do this. Deviant ghost demon infant. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he saw the demonic aura vortex. Nie Tian, it seems that I have underestimated your strength. Yen Wuyu spoke in a cold tone. I did not want to use the deviant ghost demon infant, but it seems that I have no choice but to use it now. He initially wanted to keep the deviant ghost demon infant as his final trump card, but Nie Tian's strength had clearly exceeded his expectations. The deviant ghost demon infant is the reason why I must kill you. Nye Tian glared at Yenwuyu. The murderous intent in his eyes intensified. You think you can do it? Yenwuyu sneered and thrust his palm forward. In an instant, the entire fighting ring was enveloped by a terrifying demonic aura. Nye Tian did not panic despite being surrounded by the demonic aura. Instead, his lips curled into a creepy smile. In the next instant, the demonic aura on the fighting ring turned violent and surged into Nye Tian's martial physique. Nye Tian wore an indifferent expression. He did not resist at all. Instead, he circulated his yuan meridians and rapidly absorbed the demonic aura. Since his heavenly Tao formation could fuse with the runes of deviant ghosts, it could also fuse with demonic aura and the deviant ghost demon infant. In the blink of an eye, a huge amount of demonic aura surged into Nye Tian's body and condensed into the deviant ghost demon infant. Ha ha ha! Nye Tian, you're dead meat! Yenwuyu burst out laughing when he saw the deviant ghost demon infant entering Nye Tian's martial physique. Oh no! Yu Luo, who was outside the fighting platform, saw this scene and her pretty face sank. She had already warned Nye Tian not to let the deviant ghost demon infant near him. Why did Nye Tian ignore her warning? The crowd's eyes widened in shock. The deviant ghost demon infant was extremely terrifying. Once it entered a cultivator's body, it could instantly devour the cultivator's yuan meridians and flesh. Wasn't Nye Tian going to die this time? Is that so? Nye Tian Tianling stood in midair with a cold smile on his face. You still don't know when you're about to die. You're courting death. Yenwuyu sneered and formed a seal with his hands. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. At this moment, the deviant ghost demon infant in Nye Tian's body went berserk. It started devouring his yuan meridians and flesh like thousands of maggots. Nye Tian frowned when he felt a sharp pain in his body. His lips twitched. In the next moment, with a single thought, the heavenly Tao formation in his body began to operate in a frenzy, and waves of heavenly Tao energy filled every corner of his body. Chapter 3092. Heinous Crime, HHHH. A piercing shriek echoed in the air, causing everyone's eyes to flicker and their faces to be filled with astonishment and doubt. The shriek sounded like the cry of a baby, but it was filled with hostility. What was even stranger was that the shriek was coming from Nye Tian's body. On the battle stage, Yenwuyu was taken aback at first. Then, as if he had thought of something, his expression abruptly changed, and he cried out in shock. He clearly knew that the shriek did not come from Nye Tian, but from the demonic infant. Judging from the demonic infant's shriek, it was in great pain. Following this, Yenwuyu glanced at Nye Tian and sensed the aura of the demonic infant. His eyes widened as his expression turned into one of extreme astonishment. He could sense that the demonic infant was not devouring Nye Tian's yuan meridians and flesh. Instead, it was being restrained by a terrifying force from Nye Tian's body. How is this possible? Yenwuyu's eyes trembled as he let out a scream. He could not believe his eyes. The demonic infant had always been devouring the flesh and yuan meridians of others. Why was it being restrained after entering Nye Tian's martial physique? What kind of force was inside Nye Tian's body? Are you surprised? Nye Tian looked at Yenwuyu as a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He said coldly, "Your deviant ghost demonic infant is only SOSO. The heavenly formation was the reason why the demonic infant had entered Nye Tian's body. The evil force had even activated the power of the 9 heavenly shackles. Nye Tian did not expect the power of the heavenly formation to be this strong. Nye Tian, the heavenly formation contains the power of the heavenly Tao." The ghost monarch's voice was heard. "Even though you can no longer use the demon eye and the heavenly punishment heavenly spirit, if you can control the power of the heavenly formation, it will not be any weaker than the demon god's eyes." Nye Tian nodded his head. With a thought, the heavenly Tao formation in his body began to operate at a greater speed. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, violent heavenly energy was released, instantly turning into invisible shackles, firmly restraining the deviant ghost demon infant. Ah! The deviant ghost demonic infant's mournful wail rang out once more. It was cold and piercing to the ears. My deviant ghost demon infant! At this moment, Yen Wuyu finally came to his senses. With a loud shout, his figure flashed, and he attacked Nie Tian. He could feel that the deviant ghost demon infant's aura was slowly weakening. If he continued to hesitate, the deviant ghost demon infant would be absorbed by Nie Tian. The deviant ghost demonic infant was something that he had spent countless blood, sweat, and tears to refine. He had sacrificed the lives of 1 billion infants, so how could he allow Nie Tian to take it away just like that? Without the deviant specter demonic infant, you're no different from an ordinary third-grade pseudo-sage. Nie Tianling sneered. His sword intent soared into the sky, and a terrifying sword intent pierced through the air like a sharp blade, as if it was about to tear the void apart. Sacred heaven-defying sword, human sword slashes the stars. In the next moment, Nie Tian's lips twitched as he uttered boom. Boom! In midair, a 10,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared, causing the void to tremble. The sword shadow was like a dragon breaking through the abyss, fiercely slashing towards Yen Wuyu. Bang, bang, bang! In the next moment, the deviant ghost talismans around Yen Wuyu's body crumbled under the impact of the sword intent. Yen Wuyu, in order to increase your strength, you refined the deviant ghost demon infant and killed so many innocent infants. You have committed heinous crimes that are too numerous to list. Today, I, Nie Tian, will enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and slaughter you. Nie Tian had no intention of giving Yen Wuyu any chance. His eyes were cold as his sword intent surged, making him look like a god of slaughter that had just walked out from hell. For a deviant ghost demon infant, he had cruelly killed 1 billion infants. If he did not kill such a crime, the heavens would not tolerate it. Boom! As soon as Nie Tian's voice fell, the sword shadow suddenly erupted with unstoppable power, crashing towards Yen Wuyu like a landslide or a tsunami. In an instant, Yen Wuyu felt the aura of death descending upon him. His eyes trembled, and his mouth opened wide, but he could not make a sound. Nie Tian was right. Without the deviant ghost demon infant, Yen Wuyu was no different from an ordinary third-stage pseudo-saint. Although Nie Tian was only a demigod saint, his actual battle prowess would not be at a disadvantage even in a head-on clash with a quasi-saint. Nie Tian, don't. Outside the arena, Yuluo's eyes flickered as she saw the scene in the sky. She had warned Nie Tian not to kill Yen Wuyu. Yen Wuyu's status in the Rakshasa temple was not high, but his master was the deviant ghost demon king. If Nie Tian killed Yen Wuyu, the Rakshasa king would not let it go. The Rakshasa king had many disciples, but Yen Wuyu was the only one who had successfully refined a deviant ghost demon infant and was highly regarded by the Rakshasa king. Although Yuluo was the Rakshasa saintess and had a higher status than the Rakshasa king, her actual power was far less than the Rakshasa king's. If the Rakshasa king was determined to kill Nie Tian, it would be very troublesome. Yen Wuyu. At the same time, high up in the sky, the Rakshasa king was shocked by the scene on the fighting ring. Then it reacted and screamed in horror. If the heaven's chosen saint envoy was not present, he would definitely save Yen Wuyu. But it was already too late. Boom! As soon as Yuluo and the Rakshasa king finished speaking, a huge sword shadow whizzed past and engulfed Yen Wuyu's figure. Boom! Then, the entire arena shook under the impact of the sword shadow, and a huge pit appeared. As for Yen Wuyu, not even his bones were left. The entire arena was deathly silent. Countless gazes were fixed on Nie Tian, their faces filled with shock, and none of them could utter a word for a long time. Hiss! After a long time, the crowd finally reacted and gasped. The fear in their eyes when they looked at Nye Tian was even more obvious. Nye Tian was too terrifying. He actually killed Yenwuyu, who had the deviant ghost demon infant. Nye Tian. In the distant sky, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star's eyes trembled slightly, and he almost squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. He did not expect Nye Tian to kill Yenwuyu in such a way. If he was Yenwuyu's opponent, he might not lose. But if he wanted to kill Yenwuyu, it would definitely not be as easy as Nye Tian. In the air above the arena, Nye Tian smiled faintly. He watched the huge pit on the arena slowly recover, and then his figure moved and he left the arena. Nye Tian. As soon as he left the arena, a low murderous voice sounded in the sky. It rumbled like thunder and brought with it an extremely strong oppressive aura. Nye Tian frowned and raised his head to look at the void. He narrowed his eyes and the corner of his mouth twitched as he said, Rakshasa King. The person in the sky was the Rakshasa King. What is he trying to do? When the crowd saw the Rakshasa King, their eyes trembled and they exclaimed. Chapter 3093. Scram. The crowd looked at the Rakshasa King that had suddenly appeared in the sky, their eyes trembling. Did the Rakshasa King want to kill Nye Tian now? Rakshasa King. Yuluo's eyes flickered when she saw this. She cried out in her heart, her pretty face filled with unconcealable nervousness. She was really worried that the Rakshasa King would suddenly lose control and attack Nye Tian. Lord Rakshasa, what can I do for you? Nye Tian naturally knew the Rakshasa King's identity, but he was not nervous at all. There was not even the slightest change in his expression. He only smiled faintly and asked very politely, Nye Tian, do you know who the person you just killed is? The Rakshasa King's eyes were as cold as ice, his tone cold as ice as he spoke. His eyes were trembling, and it was obvious that he was suppressing his anger. Of course I do. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said loudly, Yenwuyu is the disciple of Lord Rakshasa King, and the disciple he is most proud of. I heard that Yenwuyu is the only person in the Rakshasa temple apart from Lord Rakshasa King who has refined a demonic infant. I wonder if it's true? With that, Nye Tian raised his eyebrows and looked at the Rakshasa King provocatively. Yenwuyu's crimes were monstrous, but the Rakshasa King's crimes were even more monstrous. Nye Tian's attitude towards him was naturally not respectful. Brat, you know that Yenwuyu is this king's most proud disciple, yet you still dared to kill him. Are you looking down on this king? The Rakshasa King did not expect Nye Tian to be so frank. The killing intent and anger in his eyes immediately intensified as he spoke in a deep voice. Everyone could feel the killing intent and anger of the Rakshasa King, and their eyes could not help but tremble. Everyone already knew Yenwuyu's identity, but Nye Tian's provocative attitude was out of everyone's expectations. Wasn't he afraid that the Rakshasa King would suddenly go crazy and directly kill him? Lord Deviant Ghost, I don't care about scum like you who kill babies. Facing the oppression of the variant ghost Rakshasa King, Nye Tian's reaction was very calm. He looked at the variant ghost Rakshasa King and said in a cold voice, But I will write you on my death list. When Devil King heard Nye Tian's words, he could not help but stare. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that Nye Tian's attitude would be so domineering, arrogant and provocative. The others' expressions also flickered, and the way they looked at Nye Tian changed. Nye Tian was really too insolent. In front of so many people, he called the variant ghost Rakshasa King a scum. This was no different from directly provoking the variant ghost Rakshasa King and provoking the 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple. Brat, you actually dare to threaten this king. Demonic ghost Rakshasa King immediately calmed down. His eyes were extremely cold as he said in a deep voice, Aren't you afraid that this king will directly kill you? Do you dare? Nye Tianling laughed and said directly, If you dare, you would have already done it. Why would you still be here talking nonsense with me? You! Devil Rakshasa King's eyes narrowed. he suddenly felt his chest sink and was unable to speak. Nye Tian's calmness at this moment was far beyond his expectations. He indeed did not dare to kill Nye Tian because Heaven's chosen sage and Heaven's chosen envoy were beside him. Even if Heaven's chosen sage wanted Nye Tian to die, he could not just watch someone openly violate the rules of Heaven's chosen end and not do anything. Devil Rakshasa King, since you don't dare, then scram. At this moment, Nye Tianling laughed and his figure moved, leaving directly. He had more important things to do and could not be bothered to tangle with Devil Rakshasa King. Devil Rakshasa King stared at Nye Tian's back. His eyes were about to pop out of his head and his body trembled violently. It was obvious that he was extremely angry. But at this moment, he still had some rationality and did not attack Nye Tian. This was because he knew that Heaven's chosen envoy would not just stand by and watch. Even if he could really kill Nye Tian, he would die at the hands of Heaven's chosen envoy. He wanted to kill Nye Tian, but he definitely did not want to die because of Nye Tian. In any case, there would be many opportunities to kill Nye Tian in the future, so there was no rush. Nye Tian, let's wait and see. Devil Rakshasa King was extremely unwilling, but in the end, he still turned and left. The small disturbance ended just like that. Next, the battle for the top 64 continued. At this moment, Nye Tian did not pay attention to the other battles. Instead, he found Feng Shutong and began to cultivate. Just now, his Heaven's Path formation had absorbed the deviant ghost demon infant. Next, it was time to refine and fuse it. Ghost Emperor said that as long as Nye Tian could refine the deviant ghost demon infant's power and fuse it with the Heaven's Path formation, his strength would most likely break through to the false sage stage. If his strength could break through to the false sage stage, his chances of winning the Heaven's Path formation would be much higher. The first round of battles for the top 64 would probably last about half a month, so Nye Tian had half a month to refine and absorb the deviant ghost demon infant's power. The following battles were mostly battles between the strong and the weak. There was nothing particularly exciting about them. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. Nye Tian stood up, but his expression did not look good. After half a month of cultivation, he had successfully refined the deviant ghost demon infant's power. However, his strength still did not break through, and he was still a demi-saint. It seems that the Heaven's Path formation has a huge impact on your martial body. Even after refining and absorbing the deviant ghost demon infant's power, you still could not break through to the false sage stage. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard, but he laughed and said, "This may not be a bad thing. At least, it means that your martial body is much stronger than before." Nye Tian nodded. He could only comfort himself with that. However, after half a month of cultivation, Nye Tian had a new understanding of the Heaven's Path formation. Moreover, he had gained a great harvest from his understanding of the Heaven's Path formation. He had comprehended the third style of the Sacred Heaven Defiance Sword, Sky Sword Reversing Sun. The three styles of the Sacred Heaven Defiance Sword were Star Cutting with the Human Sword, Moon Swallowing with the Earth Sword, and Sun Sword Reversing Sun. At this time, Nye Tian had mastered the complete three styles. Star Cutting with the Human Sword and Moon Swallowing with the Earth Sword are very powerful. The Sun Sword Reversing Sun should be even more powerful. Nye Tian's lips curled up slightly as he thought to himself. The Sun Sword Reversing Sun had given him another powerful trump card. Then, one day later, the first round of battles for the top 64 ended. In the first round, 32 people were directly eliminated, and the 32 who won advanced to the top 32. Battle for the top 32, first match, number 9 versus number 15. Then, the battle for the top 32 began, and the Saint Envoy of Heaven's Choice announced the start of the first match. Nye Tian frowned and looked at Yulua. He remembered that Yulua's number was precisely number 9. The crowd's eyes sparkled as they looked forward to the battle. Very quickly, two silhouettes appeared on the battle platform. One of the silhouettes was extremely beautiful. It was the Rakshasa saintess, Yulua. Yulua stood in the air, her white clothes and long hair fluttering in the wind. She looked like a fairy that had descended to the mortal world. The crowd couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. In front of her was a short man who was even smaller than a woman. His appearance was so ugly that it would make anyone feel disgusted at first glance. Chapter 3094. Blood Rain. Tian looked at the ugly short man, and he actually sensed a familiar aura from him. His expression couldn't help but change. This is the aura of the soul-devouring curse. Tian exclaimed in his heart. Soul-devouring curse. He was sure that the short man had the aura of the soul-devouring curse. The soul-devouring curse was the bloodline power of the soul-devouring ghost tribe, one of the 4 great ancient clans. It was a power that specialized in seizing souls. Tian had encountered a soul-devouring ghost tribe member at the Arctic Ice Mountain. That person had possessed a disciple from the Sacred Soul Academy called Luoqi. At this moment, Tian sensed the same aura from the short man as he did from Luoqi. Without a doubt, the short man was from the soul-devouring ghost tribe. Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself, this person has hidden his strength well. He had never realized that there was such a dangerous person in the world. At this moment, the crowd looked at the two figures in the fighting ring and began to discuss among themselves. Who is that guy? With his looks, he's not fit to be the Saintess' opponent. That's right. The Saintess is a peerless woman. Even if he were to be her opponent, he would need to be slightly more presentable. Just wait and see. That short man will definitely be killed by the Saintess in an instant. As the crowd discussed, they looked at the short man with undisguised disdain. Everyone felt that the Rakshasa Saintess would definitely win this battle without any suspense. However, Tian was worried. It would not be easy for Yuluo to take down the Saintess. He was not looking down on Yuluo, but the soul-devouring ghost tribe was too strange. Your Highness, you are a woman. I can let you have 3 moves first. At this moment, the short man in the fighting ring spoke politely with a smile on his face. His words were courteous, but his eyes were filled with a sinister intent. Are you looking down on me? Yuluo's beautiful eyes flickered as a terrifying aura surged from her body. She spoke in a cold voice. This holy maiden sees that you are short, so I'll let you make the first move. Sure. The corners of the short man's mouth curled into a smile. His eyes flickered as he said, Since your Highness the Saintess is so polite, then I will respectfully accept. As soon as he finished speaking, Sure Yu's figure moved. Rays of crimson light suddenly gushed out from his body, and instantly, the smell of blood filled the entire fighting ring. What a strong smell of blood! Everyone instantly felt the terrifying stench of blood. Their eyes couldn't help but tremble, and the way they looked at Shigyur changed. Many people had witnessed Shigyur's previous battles, and none of them had ever seen him unleash such terrifying power. This guy named Felicitous Rain is really treacherous. Tian's eyes flickered as he thought to himself. It was obvious that Felicitous Rain had intentionally concealed his strength during the previous battle. Moreover, he was fully aware of how terrifying Yuluo was. That was why he had provoked her verbally, pretending to let Yuluo make the first move. In reality, he wanted to make the first move and gain the advantage. Yuluo was still inexperienced, and she fell for Sure Yu's trick. This is... On the fighting ring, Yuluo sensed that something was amiss. Her pretty face stiffened, and her heart sank as she exclaimed, A barrier! In the void, the aura of the barrier was extremely intense, and it was extremely terrifying. Yuluo didn't expect that Sure Yu would directly activate the barrier. Your Highness, the barrier I activated is called the Yellow Springs Blood Rain. Sure Yu chuckled and said, Your Highness, devouring of the universe is too terrifying. Sure Yu doesn't dare to be careless, so I can only use the Yellow Springs blood rain to fight against it. You. Yuluo frowned. Only now did she realize that she had been tricked. Her pretty face sank, and she was speechless. Your Highness, my Yellow Springs blood rain is very powerful. Therefore, let me give you a piece of advice. You'd better admit defeat. Otherwise, it won't be good if I injure you. Shiryu smiled faintly, and his pair of beady eyes flickered, making him look extremely wretched. Admit defeat? Yuluo frowned, and her pretty face was ice-cold. She said, Do you think that's possible? Shiryu seemed to have already guessed Yuluo's reaction, and he wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he laughed and said, In that case, sure you won't be polite. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure moved in an instant. In the next moment, a strange scene occurred. Shiryu's figure actually disappeared in the air, and he was nowhere to be seen. Following that, the scarlet blood light in the void suddenly became violent, and it actually formed a curtain of rain in the sky, as if it was really a rain of blood. At this moment, the crowd felt the pungent smell of blood rushing towards them. Their eyes involuntarily trembled, and they were extremely shocked. At this moment, they finally realized how terrifying Shiryu was. This guy is so powerful. Nye Tian looked at the scene on the fighting ring, and he couldn't help but frown, and he said in his heart, The soul-devouring ghost clan's bloodline power, the soul-devouring ghost curse, not only could it seize the soul, but it could also seize the power of the bloodline. Moreover, under the stimulation of the soul-devouring ghost curse, it could display even greater power. Therefore, if Shiryu in front of him had seized the bodies of several martial artists, his body would have the power of several bloodlines at the same time. And the strangest thing was that Nye Tian couldn't sense Shiryu's true strength. On the fighting ring, Yuluo looked at the scarlet rain curtain in front of her, and she frowned slightly. Her heart was filled with shock. She felt that the void was filled with terrifying power, and it was extremely sharp. It wrapped around her body, as if it wanted to tear her apart bit by bit, and then absorb the power of her bloodline. At this moment, Shiryu's extremely arrogant voice was heard from the void, and it was extremely arrogant. Presumptuous! Yuluo's beautiful eyes trembled, and she let out a delicate roar. The 9 yuan meridians in her body were activated, and her entire body's aura soared to the sky. But at this moment, she discovered that her yuan meridians were actually under great suppression. Your Highness, the universal devouring formula is truly powerful, to be able to unleash such a frightening presence even in my Yellow Springs blood rain. Shiryu's cold and provocative voice rang out from the void again. The Yellow Springs blood rain was very frightening, and if Yuluo had not cultivated the universal devouring formula, her yuan meridians would have been completely suppressed, and she would not be able to unleash even a little bit of her power. But even with the universal devouring formula, Yuluo was still greatly suppressed. Right now, her ability was directly suppressed to the tier of demi-saint. I'm sorry, Your Highness. It was at that moment that Shiryu's low, murderous voice resounded amidst the blood rain void. Soon, the veils of blood became violent as if they were sharp blades, so sharp that they seemed to be able to tear the void apart. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. In the very next instant, countless veils of blood rose with a rumble, blanketing the world as they engulfed Yuluo. Oh no! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed at the sight on the fighting ring, and he cried out in shock in his mind. Right now, Shiryu was clearly intent on taking Yuluo's life. He must have taken a liking to Yuluo's bloodline power, and wanted to take it for himself. Nye Tian never imagined that Shiryu would be so bold as to really try to kill Yuluo. After all, Yuluo was the saintess of the Rakshasa Temple of the 10 Directions, and there were even 3 Rakshasa kings watching. Chapter 3095. Myriad Universe Sacred Seal. The scene in the fighting ring made everyone's eyes tremble and their expressions stiffen. No one had expected Shiryu to be so ruthless as to actually kill Yuluo. Yuluo was the Rakshasa saintess of the Rakshasa Temple. Killing her would definitely infuriate the Rakshasa temple. How could the 3 Rakshasa kings spare Shuryu? However, Shuryu did not seem to be afraid. He wanted to kill Yulua at all costs. Perhaps Yulua's bloodline power was too tempting for him. Your Highness, I gave you the chance to admit defeat, but you didn't cherish it. You can't blame me for this. Shuryu's cold and murderous voice sounded in the blood rain, like a death knell. Swish, swish, swish. In an instant, the blood rain formed into blades and filled the entire fighting ring. The void seemed to be on the verge of collapsing as it tried to kill Yulua. The scene in the fighting ring made Nietian's eyes narrow. His expression changed and he roared in his heart, "Oh no!" The power of the Yellow Springs blood rain was extremely terrifying. The blood rain was sharp and murderous. If it attacked, even if Yulua did not die, she would be seriously injured. What was even more terrifying was that Nietian felt that the blood rain contained a very powerful bloodline aura. It was the power of the soul-devouring curse. Your Highness! At the same time, Desolate Beginning and the other 2 Rakshasa kings exclaimed at the same time. Their eyes instantly froze. As the Rakshasa saintess, if Yulua was killed in front of their eyes, it would not only be a disgrace to the Rakshasa temple, but also the 3 of them. If the Rakshasa temple masters were enraged, they would also suffer. However, this was the Heaven's Choice battle. The referee was the Heaven's Choice sacred envoy, and the Heaven's Choice honorable was watching. Even if they wanted to make a move, they did not dare. At this time, no one could save Yulua, except for herself. On the fighting ring, Yulua frowned and beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. However, she still remained calm. She could sense that the blood rain around her was extremely terrifying. There was an extremely evil power within it that made her feel like her bloodline power was being devoured even though it wasn't close to her. She knew that if the blood rain fell on her body, it would instantly absorb all of her bloodline power. Pooh! Just at this moment of life and death, Yuluo's beautiful eyes trembled as blood suddenly gushed out from her fingertips. After that, she waved her jade-like hand, and the blood actually condensed into a dazzling imprint in the air. Myriad Universe Sage Seal, break! In the next moment, she let out a low roar and struck out with her palm. Immediately, the power of the Saint Seal was released and expanded rapidly in the air, directly breaking a gap in the Yellow Springs blood rain. Retreat! Then, Yulua lightly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot. Her figure was swift and agile, like a rainbow, she flew out of the gap. Evidently, Shuryu hadn't expected this to happen. Frowning, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. After which, his gaze turned cold as killing intent filled his eyes. Your Highness Holy Maiden, I'm afraid you won't be able to escape. Yellow Springs blood rain, burial of blood rain. Shuryu's eyes were filled with killing intent as he spoke coldly. His hands formed a sinister seal. Boom! As his hands completed the seal, the huge Yellow Springs blood rain barrier suddenly flipped, like a huge curtain that began to flow in reverse. Suddenly, the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier rolled like a huge wave, pressing down on Yulua. Watch out! Nietian looked at the scene on the stage. His eyes suddenly trembled, and he cried out in shock. Yuluo using her blood to activate the Myriad Universe Sage Seal and forcefully break the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier was already unexpected to him. He didn't expect Shuryu to be so ruthless and actually changed the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier to kill Yuluo. The 3 Rakshasa kings in the sky were also shocked. They didn't expect Yulua to have cultivated the Myriad Universe devouring art to such a level that she could actually condense the Myriad Universe Sage Seal. Originally, they thought that even if the Myriad Universe Sage Seal couldn't allow Yulua to completely break the Yellow Springs blood rain, it would at least allow her to escape from danger. However, Shuryu's ruthlessness was beyond their expectations. With the Yellow Springs blood rain surging, it would be very difficult for Yulua to escape. The eyes of the crowd outside the battle platform trembled violently. No one would have thought that this battle would be so intense. Damn it! On the battle platform, feeling the pressure of the blood rain in the void, Yulua's beautiful eyes flickered, and she shouted, then used her blood to activate the Myriad Universe Sage Seal again. Boom! In an instant, the Myriad Universe Sage Seal was activated, and it directly enveloped Yulua's entire body like a shield of light. Bang bang bang! Then, endless blood rain fell, like arrows bombarding the Myriad Universe Sage Seal. Drops of blood fell, but it couldn't break the Sage Seal. Seeing this, Yulua tiptoed lightly, and her figure instantly accelerated, forcibly breaking through the endless blood rain, and left the battle platform. Hua! The moment her figure left, a huge amount of blood rain fell like a curtain, and the entire battle platform shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Everyone's eyes suddenly trembled, and their tensed nerves immediately relaxed. Yulua escaped the battle platform, which was beyond everyone's expectations. In midair, Yulua's figure froze, her face as pale as paper, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. She had forcefully activated the Myriad Universe Sage Seal, and the impact of the Yellow Springs blood rain had seriously injured her. But fortunately she survived. At this moment, on the battle stage, the Yellow Springs blood rain disappeared and Shiryu's silhouette reappeared. A pair of cold eyes stared at Yuluo and exclaimed in surprise. After that, he sneered. As expected of the Holy Maiden of the 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple, you actually managed to escape from my Yellow Springs blood rain. Shiryu admires you. Despicable person. Yulua's beautiful eyes trembled, and she said coldly. If she and Shiryu had attacked at the same time, the outcome of the battle might not have been certain. Shiryu deliberately provoked her, and obtained the opportunity to attack first, so he activated the Yellow Springs blood rain, which put her in a predicament. If the two of them fought head-on, Yulua might have a higher chance of winning with the help of the Myriad Universe Sage Seal. Despicable is also a method. Shiryu's eyes darkened and he did not deny it. Instead, he smiled sinisterly. Then, his figure moved and he directly left. Although Yulua managed to survive, she had already left the battle platform. This battle was already lost. The Rakshasa Temple Saintess was eliminated. This was something that no one had expected. Through this battle, felicitous rain made everyone remember his name. Shiryu, I will remember you. Nye Tian stared at Shiryu's back, and the corner of his lips curled up as he said coldly, I will remember you. At this moment, Shiryu suddenly turned around, and a pair of cold and venomous eyes locked onto Nye Tian. A strange smile appeared on his face, but he did not say anything. It seems like you also want to steal my bloodline power. Nye Tian smiled indifferently, and the corner of his lips curled up as he mumbled. Shiryu stared at him like a wolf staring at its prey. It was obvious that he wanted to steal his bloodline power. However, the power of his bloodline wasn't that easy to seize. He was different from Yulua, and it was impossible for Shiryu's little tricks to not be able to harm him. Battle of the Top 32, Second Battle, Number 16 versus Number 27. Next, the Heaven's Choice Envoy announced the start of the second battle. It's my turn. Nye Tian smiled, but he was not in a hurry. He was waiting for his opponent to come up. After a while, a figure appeared on the platform. It's this guy. Nye Tian stared at the figure, and his eyes narrowed as his lips curled up into a cold smile. Chapter 3096. Black Sand Giant. Seeing that his opponent was Sha Xian, Nye Tian didn't panic. Instead, he smiled and said, I can use you to test the strength of the Sky Sword Defying Sunday. Sha Xian was very strong. He had reached the Fourth Order's pseudo-sacred realm, and was a very powerful opponent. Nye Tian had just grasped the third move of the sacred heaven-defying sword, Sky Sword Defying Sunday. It was a good opportunity for him to test the power of the Sky Sword Defying Sun on Sha Xian. With a faint smile, Nye Tian's figure flashed and he landed on the fighting ring. Nye Tian, it's you. Sha Xian's eyes trembled when he saw Nye Tian. A cold smile appeared on his face and he said, "Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road." Previously, he wanted to kill Feng Qi but was stopped by Nie Tian. He hated Nie Tian for a long time. Now that his opponent was Nie Tian, he couldn't help but feel excited. "Looks like you really want to kill me." Nie Tian smiled and stood with his hands behind his back. His eyes were as calm as water. "Humph." Sha Xian smiled Nie Tian and said, "Nie Tian, you were in the limelight in the first 2 rounds. I admit that you're very talented. Even I can't compare to you. But you're only a 9th order pseudo-sacred. You're no match for me. I can give you a chance to live. As long as you kneel and beg for mercy, kowtow to me 100 times and admit defeat, I'll spare your life. How about it?" He raised his brows with a provocative and disdainful look. Everyone couldn't help but frown when they heard Sha Xian's words. This guy is too arrogant. His opponent is Nie Tian, but he dares to ask Nie Tian to admit defeat. How arrogant! That's right. Nie Tian even killed the variant ghost demon infant. Does he think he's stronger than the variant ghost demon infant? Although Nie Tian is only a demi-saint, his combat ability is probably stronger than that of an ordinary demi-saint. This guy is just a rank 4 pseudo-saint, yet he dares to be so arrogant in front of Nie Tian? Isn't he courting death? The crowd discussed in low voices. They were actually very confident in Nie Tian. After all, Nie Tian had proven his strength by killing the deviant ghost devil infant Yenwuyu in a domineering manner. On the other hand, Sha Xian had yet to meet a truly strong opponent. Kowtowing and admitting defeat doesn't suit me. On the fighting ring, the corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He smiled cold and said, "I think you will kowtow and admit defeat." Arrogant. Sha Xian laughed coldly. After that, he moved. Endless amounts of black sand gushed out from his body. It was as sharp as a blade and rumbling sounds rang out, as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. Nie Tian felt the violent aura coming at him. His eyes narrowed slightly. Suddenly, a towering sword will surged out from his body. Starry heavenly slash appeared in his hand, and he slashed at the void. Kaboom! Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A 10,000-meter-long sword shadow descended and bombarded the black sand that filled the sky, forcibly breaking through the black sand blades. High up in the sky, Nie Tian and Sha Xian retreated and stood coldly in the air. What a powerful force! The crowd looked at the fighting ring with trembling eyes. The strength that Sha Xian had displayed was beyond their expectations. Although Sha Xian only had the strength of a rank 4 pseudo-saint, his combat ability was comparable to a rank 5 pseudo-saint, or even a rank 6 pseudo-saint. No wonder he dared to provoke Nie Tian like that. Nie Tian, you're not bad. It seems that I have underestimated you. Sha Xian stood in the air and laughed coldly. His body was surging with terrifying black sand, and his eyes were filled with violence. He had originally thought that Nie Tian would not be able to withstand his black sand attack. He had not expected that Nie Tian's strength was much stronger than he had imagined. You're not bad either. At least, you're much stronger than I had imagined. Nie Tian also smiled and said lightly. He had underestimated Sha Xian's strength. Sha Xian had a wild force in his body that made his martial body far stronger than martial artists of the same level. His combat ability was even more terrifying. However, Nie Tian was not afraid. The stronger Sha Xian was, the more intense his battle intent was. Black sand burial. At that moment, Sha Xian made another move. As he thrust his palm out, the black sand in the air instantly condensed into a huge hand made of black sand that slammed down towards Nie Tian. Starry Sky 9 Limits, Sky Slash. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and the corner of his mouth twitched. The 9 yuan meridians in his body were operating wildly as he swung his sword at the giant hand of black sand. Kaboom! In the next moment, the terrifying sword shadow fell and split the giant hand of black sand apart. The black sand in the air scattered like sharp blades. Die! Immediately afterwards, Nye Tian let out a fierce roar as he blurred into motion and slashed his sword towards Sha Xian at lightning speed. Boom! The sound of a sword rang out in the air. The huge sword shadow was like a giant dragon as it rushed towards Sha Xian in a frenzy. What a powerful sword! The crowd saw the scene and felt the sword momentum in the air. Their eyes trembled violently as they cried out in shock. Everyone thought that Sha Xian would be dead the moment the sword fell. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have found it hard to believe that a rank 9 demi-saint martial artist could unleash such a terrifying sword. Nye Tian, it's impossible for you to kill me with such strength. But at this moment, Sha Xian's deep roar resounded in the sky. Then, the huge battle platform began to shake, and the black sand in the air became even more violent as it rapidly condensed towards Sha Xian. Roar! In the next moment, a thunderous roar suddenly resounded on the battle platform. Then, something strange happened. A giant made of black sand appeared in the endless black sand. This! The eyes of everyone trembled, and they couldn't help but gasp. They were shocked to the point of being speechless. The black sand giant stood in the air above the battle platform. It was 10,000 meters tall, and its entire body was made of black sand. However, it looked very compact and extremely tough. That roar just now was from the black sand giant. Kaboom! Then, the black sand giant moved. It waved its huge arm in the air and shattered the huge sword shadow that was descending on it. Nye Tian could not help but frown when he saw that. Then, he felt a huge pressure coming at him. His astral soul wings immediately appeared on his back as he retreated. His reaction was fast, but he was still a step too late. Boom! A dull sound rang out in the air. Nye Tian's figure was directly sent flying. His body trembled in the air as he spat out a mouthful of blood. Oh no! He was still in the air, but his expression suddenly changed as he cried out in shock. With his current momentum, he was about to rush out of the battle platform. If he rushed out of the battle platform, he would lose according to the Heaven's Choice contest. Chapter 3097. Sun-defying sword. The crowd stared intently at Nye Tian, who was in midair. They were extremely nervous, and did not even dare to breathe heavily. If Nye Tian were to be knocked out of the fighting ring by Sha Xian, the battle would be over. Nye Tian, who had created miracles on the Heaven's Choice platform and the Doomsday Hunt, would be defeated in such a manner. On the fighting platform, Sha Xian exclaimed in surprise. Then, a huge black sand hand appeared and grabbed towards Nye Tian. Sha Xian was extremely nervous that Nye Tian was about to be knocked out of the fighting ring. His goal was not just to defeat Nye Tian. He wanted to kill Nye Tian. Nye Tian had saved Feng Qi and saved the person he wanted to kill. Sha Xian hated him very much, so he had to kill Nye Tian to vent his hatred. Swoosh! In midair, Nye Tian's eyes trembled slightly. Then, a bone-corroding soul-shackling chain surged out of his body and grabbed hold of the black sand hand. Then, he moved and the bone-corroding soul-shackling chain suddenly increased his speed. At the same time, sword intent surged out of his body and he slashed down with the starlight heavenly slash. Sacred heaven-defying sword, Earth's sword engulfs the moon. As the deep voice rang out, a massive sword shadow descended with a loud rumble. A blinding sword gleam shot out for tens of thousands of meters, and the brilliance of the sword blossomed in the surrounding void. The violent sword shadow slashed down on the black sand giant. So strong! When the crowd saw this scene, their eyes trembled violently, and they all cried out in surprise. No one had expected that Nye Tian would not be knocked out of the fighting ring. Instead, he would use the black sand giant to counterattack. Bang! In the next instant, the huge sword shadow fell like a huge waterfall and slashed the black sand giant's shoulder. A muffled explosion sounded in the air. Roar! Immediately, the black sand giant let out a deep roar as its huge arm was chopped off. Bang! 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 After the shocking scene, the black sand giant's huge body retreated in the air, causing the void to tremble. What a terrifying sword strike! The crowd exclaimed. They did not expect Nyetian to be so powerful that he could cut off the black sand giant's arm with a single strike. Nyetian stood still in midair, the corners of his mouth curling up into a fierce smile, his eyes incomparably grim. Nyetian, you have angered me! At that moment the black sand giant roared. Its gigantic body shook in the air, and its severed arm reformed. Nyetian frowned when he saw this. He could tell that the black sand giant's remolding ability was very strong, but he did not expect it to recover in an instant. Compared to Yenwuyu, Sha Xian was much more difficult to deal with. This was because his absolute strength was stronger, and he could not be countered. Nyetian, can you win this match? The Heaven's Chosen One looked at Nyetian from afar, and the corners of his mouth rose as he thought to himself. Although Nyetian was at a disadvantage, the star had a feeling that Nyetian's strength was far greater than this. She only hoped that Sha Xian would be able to force Nyetian to use a stronger trump card. The strongest opponent she had arranged for Nyetian was the number 1 genius of the Juing Shrine, Shadowfire Destroyer. Looking at the black sand giant, a cold smile appeared at the corner of Nyetian's mouth as he said in a deep voice, "Come on. Let me see how strong your black sand giant is. You're courting death." Sha Xian let out a low roar, and the black sand giant immediately started charging towards Nyetian like a moving mountain. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook and the void trembled. Black sand filled the air, covering the sky and plunging everything into darkness. "You're the one courting death." Nyetian's lips curled into a cold smile. He took a step forward and raised the starry sky slash in his hand. His sword intent soared to the extreme in an instant. Waves of sword intent soared into the sky, sharp as a blade, as if it could tear everything apart. How is this possible? At this moment, everyone felt that Nyetian's sword intent was several times stronger than before. They couldn't help but gasp in shock. Originally, they thought that Nyetian had pushed his sword intent to the extreme. They didn't think that Nyetian had been hiding his true strength. Sha Xian exclaimed in surprise when he felt the pressure of the sword intent. But at this moment, he had no way out. He could only face it head-on. If he retreated now, he would only die a more miserable death. Defying Saint Heaven's sword, defying Sun's sword. At this time, Nyetian's lips curled into a smile. The starry sky slash descended, drawing a perfect arc in the air. Suddenly, the space couldn't bear the pressure of the sword. It let out a low groan, as if it was going to be torn apart in the next moment. No. At this moment, Sha Xian cried out in shock when he felt the enormous pressure bearing down on him. But it was too late. Boom. Bam bam bam. The massive sword shadow crashed down and the void rumbled. Immediately, the violent power within the sword intent was released. The massive black sand giant could not withstand the terrifying pressure, and it collapsed in an instant. Rumble. The moment the black sand giant exploded, black sand filled the air and covered the sky. The entire fighting ring was submerged in black sand. Boom. At this moment, a dazzling sword shadow descended, breaking through the black sand and slashed at a figure on the fighting ring. No. Sha Xian's scream resounded in the sky. He seemed even more desperate and helpless than before. This. The crowd couldn't help but gasp when they saw the scene on the fighting ring. Their eyes were filled with extreme shock. Who would have thought that the seemingly powerful black sand giant would be destroyed by Nyetian's sword? The power of Nyetian's sword was beyond imagination. At this moment, through the sword radiance, everyone could see that Nyetian was going to kill Sha Xian. Humph! Amidst the black sand, Nyetian's laughter was heard. It was filled with a sinister aura. Boom! In the next moment, The violent sword shadow whistled, and the terrifying pressure of the sword arrived. However, it didn't completely descend. Bang! Sha Xian felt a terrifying pressure. His knees went soft and he knelt on the ground. Sha Xian, I told you that you will kowtow and admit defeat. Nie Tian's figure descended and the violent pressure of the sword enveloped Sha Xian. It was extremely terrifying. Sha Xian's eyes trembled and his expression was extremely ugly. He was unwilling to admit defeat, but in the end, he still kowtowed. The corner of his mouth trembled, but he couldn't speak. Nie Tian stared at Sha Xian with a murderous look in his eyes. The corner of his mouth rose into a cold arc as he said coldly, "Yeah, that's it. I want to see you kneel and beg for mercy. But I won't let you go." You! When Sha Xian heard Nie Tian's words, he suddenly lifted his head and his eyes trembled. He wanted to say something, but he didn't have the chance to. Chapter 3098. Return it to you hiss. What happened on the fighting ring was clearly seen by everyone, and they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Nie Tian was too cruel. Sha Xian had already knelt down and begged for mercy, but he still killed him without hesitation. Compared to Nie Tian was too merciful when he fought for the top 64. After Nie Tian killed Sha Xian, the black sand on the fighting platform disappeared and the sky became clear again. The Saint Envoy looked at Nie Tian and his eyes narrowed. He seemed to want to say something, but he did not. Nie Tian's ruthlessness had exceeded his expectations. Originally, he thought that Nie Tian would not have such a strong mind at such a young age. But now it seemed that he was completely wrong. Nie Tian was much stronger than he had imagined. Nie Tian was strong not only because of his talent and strength, but also because of his mind. Talent was only one aspect of a cultivator's success in the martial way. Martial will was more important. If one's martial will was not strong, no matter how talented he would not be able to go far. The martial will that the divine envoy of heaven's chosen sensed in Nie Tian made him tremble with fear. He had seen countless geniuses in the sacred world. He had even seen geniuses who stood at the peak of the sacred world. But the difference between their martial will and Nie Tian's was too great. If he was born in the sacred world, he would definitely be the most monstrous genius, the Saint Envoy thought to himself as he looked at Nie Tian's back. At the beginning of the test, he had thought that Nie Tian was a weirdo. But now, his understanding of Nie Tian had completely changed. Vaguely, he felt that the Saint Envoy was going to lose. This time, the Star Chief would definitely be Nie Tian. Nie Tian walked off the fighting platform with a calm expression and a faint smile on his face. He didn't expect the power of Sky Sword Defying Sun to be so strong. The moon-swallowing Earth Sword had only cut off one of the Black Sand Giant's arms, while the Sky Sword Defying Sun had directly killed the Black Sand Giant. The most terrifying thing was that the Sky Sword Defying Sun had increased the power of Nie Tian's sword intent by several times, which was why the Black Sand Giant was unable to recover. Nie Tian, your sacred heaven-defying sword is resonating with the heavenly Tao formation. If you can fuse the sacred heaven-defying sword into the heavenly Tao formation and comprehend the sword formation, your battle prowess will increase once again, the Ghost Emperor said excitedly. The reason why Nie Tian was able to comprehend the Sky Sword Reversing Yang was precisely related to the heavenly Tao array within his body. Nie Tian also sensed that there was indeed some sort of resonance between the heavenly Tao formation and the sacred heaven-defying sword. It was very mysterious. If he could fuse the sacred heaven-defying sword into the heavenly law formation and comprehend a sword formation, it would be truly terrifying. I won't pay attention to the following battles. Focus on comprehending the heavenly Tao formation. Nie Tian thought for a moment, then nodded. He had originally wanted to pay attention to the following battles, but now he felt that increasing his own strength was undoubtedly more important. The Ghost Emperor nodded. This Emperor will activate the heavenly Tao formation's array intent. Focus on comprehending it. Alright. Nye Tian agreed, unable to conceal the excitement in his heart. Next, Nye Tian went to Feng Shutong and the others and directly entered a state of cultivation, focusing on comprehending the heavenly Tao formation. Soon, 6 days passed. The top 32 battles were over, and the top 16 of the Heaven's Choice tournament were born. Other than the Rakshasa maiden Yuluo, who had been unexpectedly eliminated, the other experts had all advanced to the top 16. Nye Tian stood up, his brows slightly furrowed. His expression was not very good. Although he had comprehended the heavenly Tao formation with the Ghost Emperor's help, he still felt that something was missing. It was that slight obstacle that prevented him from comprehending the sword formation. Nye Tian, don't be discouraged. Although you didn't comprehend the sword formation, your sword intent has already become much stronger under the stimulation of the heavenly law formation. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor spoke. Nye Tian nodded and forced a smile at the corner of his mouth. In these 6 days, his sword intent had indeed improved by quite a bit. The power of the heavenly law originated from the heavenly sacred heart and contained the power of the heaven and earth Tao. It was not strange for it to stimulate the sword intent. Nye Tian, the top 16 battles are coming up. You must be careful. Lord Heaven's Choice Venerable will definitely arrange stronger opponents for you. At this moment, Feng Shutong came to Nye Tian's side and transmitted his voice. With his intelligence, he could already tell that Heaven's Choice Venerable had been targeting Nye Tian and had been arranging stronger opponents for him. I know. Nye Tian smiled faintly, his eyes filled with determination. In his opinion, Heaven's Choice Venerable's arrangement wasn't a bad thing. On the contrary, it was beneficial to him. If his opponents were all weaklings, what was the point of such battles? Nye Tian, I hope we can meet in the top 16 battles. At this moment, a gloomy voice rang out. A figure appeared, staring coldly at Nye Tian. It was Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Shadowfire Ruinous Star, don't worry. There will definitely be a battle between us. Nye Tian looked at Shadowfire Ruinous Star, his eyes filled with killing intent. He said cold, a battle of life and death. We will only stop when we die. Humph. Shadowfire Ruinous Star looked at Nye Tian and smiled cold. He said, Nye Tian, do you think you can kill me? You can't kill the army destroyer of Juying Temple. If I can kill you once, I can kill you twice, thrice, 10 times, 10,000 times. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched as he said, I'd like to see how many lives you have, and what is this so-called alcade you speak of? Humph. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's eyes darkened. He said cold, we'll see. Then, he walked away. As soon as Shadowfire Ruinous Star left, another figure appeared. His entire body was covered with a cold aura. His eyes were extremely dark, as if he wanted to devour someone. This figure was none other than another strong cultivator, Dao Hanyu. Nye Tian, your life is mine. Dao Hanyu's eyes were as cold as ice as he stared fixedly at Nye Tian and said, word by word. I'll return the same words to you, Nye Tian replied cold with a smile. He had killed Dao Hanyu's sworn brother, the bloodthirsty wolf. The two of them were irreconcilable enemies. Dao Hanyu was very strong. He was already a fifth-order false saint. In Nye Tian's eyes, he was second only to Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Shadowfire Ruinous Star and Dao Hanyu would be the biggest obstacles to Nye Tian's ascension to the top. Battle of the Top 16, first match, number 16 against number 3. At that moment, the voice of the Saint Envoy rang out on the platform. When Nye Tian and Dao Hanyu heard the words of the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy, their eyes shone with a cold light. Number 16 was Nye Tian, and number 3 was Dao Hanyu. Chapter 3099. Frozen Saber Intent. Nye Tian, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. You're really unlucky, Dao Hanyu said coldly as he regained his senses. His lips curled into a cold smile and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The way I see it, you're the unlucky one, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. He didn't avoid Cold Rain's gaze in the slightest. The first battle of the top 16 is between the two of them, the crowd exclaimed in shock when they saw Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu. Everyone had witnessed Nie Tian's strength. As for Dao Hanyu, although he had not met anyone particularly strong, his cultivation base had already reached the 5th rank pseudo-holy realm. This was extremely terrifying. For a cultivator below the age of 10,000 to reach the 5th rank pseudo-holy realm meant that he was extremely talented. Furthermore, Dao Hanyu's eyes were extremely terrifying. His entire body emitted a terrifying chill. Just by standing there, everyone could feel a strong pressure. Furthermore, Nie Tian had killed the bloodthirsty wolf and had formed an irreconcilable feud with Dao Hanyu. Hence, everyone was looking forward to the battle between the two. Nie Tian, you're dead meat. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's lips curled into a cold smile as he stepped onto the fighting ring. Nie Tian, you have to be careful. This person's aura is extremely strong. He's definitely going to be a tough opponent. Feng Shu Tong looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with unease. He could sense a terrifying aura from Dao Hanyu and he could not help but worry for Nie Tian. Nie Tian, the frost energy in this person's body is no weaker than my frost chi. On the other side, Emo's figure appeared and he frowned as he warned Nie Tian. Emo was someone who possessed frost chi and was extremely sensitive to frost energy. He could sense a terrifying frost energy from Dao Hanyu's body. It was even stronger than his frost chi. I know. Nie Tian smiled faintly as he suddenly lifted his head and looked at a figure on the other side. Looking at that peerlessly beautiful face, he nodded and smiled confidently. He had long noticed that Yuluo had been watching him all along, just that she did not walk over. It was obvious that Yuluo was worried about Nie Tian as well. Yes. Yuluo looked at Nie Tian from afar. Her eyes flickered and she nodded slightly. She felt an indescribable warmth in her heart, as if a warm current had flowed through it. She had never felt something like this before, and this caused a blush to appear on her pretty face, but it quickly disappeared. Although it was only for a moment, this scene was perfectly captured by the 3 Rakshasa kings in the sky. Her Highness the Holy Maiden seems to be interested in that brat. This is not a good thing. Desolate Beginning's eyes narrowed as he transmitted his voice to the other 2 Rakshasa kings. Her Highness Saintess has never left the Rakshasa royal palace. This is the first time she has come out. It's not strange for her to be tempted by such a talented person. It's just that her identity is different, and she cannot be close to men. Another Rakshasa king frowned and said in a deep voice. It doesn't matter. This brat is dead anyway. Once the Heaven Selection Contest is over, I will personally kill him. Rakshasa King's eyes were as fierce as a wolf's as he said cold. The 3 Rakshasa King's eyes darkened, and they looked at Nie Tian with murderous intent. Nie Tian did not have the time to care about them. Under countless gazes, he moved and landed in the sky above the fighting ring. Nie Tian. Seeing Nie Tian appear, the murderous intent in Dao Hanyu's eyes intensified. He smiled cold and said, I admit that in the previous few battles, you have displayed great strength, far exceeding my expectations. But it's a pity that your opponent now is me. I, Dao Hanyu, am not someone those trash can compare to. Today you will definitely die by my hands. Every single word was filled with killing intent, and it revealed a ghastly cold intent. Dao Hanyu was extremely arrogant. He did not take Yen Wuyu, Sha Xian and the rest seriously, and had even called them trash. Is that so? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he smiled cold. He could sense an extremely terrifying power from Dao Hanyu's body. At this moment, this power was continuously increasing within Dao Hanyu's body. Humph. Dao Hanyu laughed coldly, and with a jerk of his body, a terrifying power gushed out from his body. It was extremely sharp, and it looked like numerous icy runes were floating in the air. Nie Tian looked at the icy runes around Dao Hanyu's body, and he could sense a hidden saber will. He could not help but narrow his eyes. Nie Tian, let me show you my true strength. In the next moment, Dao Hanyu shouted angrily, and his eyes were extremely cold. Then, a strange scene happened. Boom! The ice runes that were surging around his body actually turned into saber intent in an instant, surging in the air, sharp and violent. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he saw this, and he was extremely shocked. He did not expect Dao Hanyu to be a saber user, but previously, he did not sense any saber will from Dao Hanyu's body. Nie Tian, this man is so strong. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor seemed to have discovered something, and he exclaimed, "He has actually merged saber will into his blood vessels." Upon hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. No wonder he did not sense any saber will from Dao Hanyu's body. It turned out that Dao Hanyu had merged saber will into his blood vessels, and used the qi of his blood vessels to conceal his saber will. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's saber will was released, and it shocked Nie Tian greatly. Merging sword will into one's blood vessels was indeed rare, and it caught Nie Tian off guard. In the next moment, Nie Tian became much colder than before, and he could not help but exclaim, "Ultimate Divine Saber Body." Not only was Dao Hanyu a saber user, but he was also a ultimate divine saber body cultivator. To be able to achieve the ultimate divine saber body cultivator at such a young age, Dao Hanyu's talent in the saber Dao was shocking. How is this possible? Outside the fighting ring, the crowd could feel the aura of Dao Hanyu's saber will, and they could not help but exclaim in shock. Who would have thought that Dao Hanyu was hiding such a terrifying strength? No wonder he called Yenwu, Sha Xian, and the rest trash. Merging saber will into his blood vessels, and the saber will and his bloodline will stimulate each other, resulting in an even stronger burst of power. Interesting. In the air, the heaven's chosen elder looked at Dao Hanyu, and the corners of his lips curled up into a smile. Dao Hanyu had indeed given her quite a pleasant surprise. Even she had not been able to tell that Dao Hanyu was such a powerful saber user. Nie Tian die. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's eyes turned cold, and he revealed his killing intent. He took a step forward, and the saber will surged from his body, and like a ripple, it spread out in the air. Chapter 3100. What a terrifying saber will! The crowd trembled as they watched the scene unfold on the fighting ring. They could not hide the fear in their eyes. The strength of Dao Hanyu's saber will was beyond everyone's expectations. It was so terrifying that he could freeze time and space with his saber will. Boom! Crack, crack, crack! On the fighting ring, the terrifying ripples of blade essence continued to spread in all directions. The space was directly frozen, and the whole fighting ring instantly became a world of ice, as if it was a huge block of ice. At this point, Nie Tian's eyes darkened. He used his sword will to resist the terrifying saber will and forcefully opened up a space on the fighting ring. He had not expected Dao Hanyu's saber will to be so terrifying. It was beyond his expectations. Even though he had formed a shield with his sword will, it could not block the invasion of the icy saber will. The saber will in the air was like ice. It was so cold that it could penetrate Nie Tian's sword will shield and penetrate his martial body. It was about to freeze his martial body. Nie Tian, this guy's saber will is too strong. His blood meridian and saber will have almost merged into one and stimulated each other, increasing the power of his saber will by several times. Although he is only a divine saber body bladesman, his saber will is even stronger than a divine profound saber body bladesman. Ghost Emperor said in a low voice. Dao Hanyu was indeed a genius. He could merge saber will and blood meridian to such an extent that it was almost perfect. It was no wonder that no one could tell that he was a saber body bladesman. His blood meridian and saber will stimulated each other, increasing Dao Hanyu's saber will by several times. Dao Hanyu was a divine saber body bladesman. Coupled with the stimulation of his blood meridian, his saber will was no weaker than a divine profound saber body bladesman. On the other hand, Nie Tian was only a legendary swordsman. He was 2 realms lower than Dao Hanyu. Even if his sword will was strong, he could not make up for the difference. This kind of direct confrontation between sword intent and saber intent was very disadvantageous to Nie Tian. Ah, you little ant, to think that you would be able to retaliate against my saber will. What a surprise! At this moment, Dao Hanyu's maniacal laughter rang out as he unleashed his saber will in a frenzy. In his opinion, it was already a miracle that a legendary swordsman who had fused sword and martial arts into one was able to resist his sword intent head-on. However, this miracle was destined to be short-lived. Nie Tian, I'll show you exactly how strong my cold rain saber intent is. Following that, Dao Hanyu let out a low growl and released his saber intent in a frenzy. His entire being was like an abyss of saber intent, constantly releasing sharp saber intent. Boom boom boom. In the void, the cold rain saber intent spread wildly, causing the heaven and earth to tremble violently. This person is so scary. The eyes of the spectators trembled even more intensely. The cold aura in the air made them feel as though all the yuan meridians in their bodies were about to be frozen. Dao Hanyu's saber intent was so strong that it made one's hair stand on end. Nie Tian could feel that the saber intent was getting stronger and the cold aura was getting scarier. His eyes narrowed slightly. Nie Tian, he wants to freeze you directly. You have to break through the pressure of the saber intent. At this moment, Ghost Emperor's voice rang out anxiously. However, Nie Tian acted as though he had not heard Ghost Emperor's words. He stood on the spot as though he was meditating. He did not move an inch, and even closed his eyes. Nie Tian, what are you doing? Ghost Emperor was taken aback for a moment before he let out a strange cry. Brat, you're courting death. Seeing that Nie Tian had closed his eyes, Dao Hanyu felt that he was being looked down upon. With a low growl, he struck out with a wild slash. In the next moment, a strange scene unfolded. Swoosh! In the frozen space above the fighting ring, Dao Hanyu's saber intent was able to travel freely, unhindered by the space. The saber intent condensed into a saber shadow that was like a fish swimming in the water, diving towards Nie Tian. In the process, the saber shadow continued to absorb the saber intent in the frozen space, and grew stronger. Dao Hanyu's slash was extremely powerful, and its attacking power was unimaginable. More importantly, Nie Tian was trapped in the frozen space, and had no way of dodging it. If this saber were to fall, Nie Tian's fate would be certain death. What they saw caused everyone's eyes to tremble in fear. Why is Nie Tian not moving? What is he doing? He closed his eyes. Could it be that he knows he can't escape death and has accepted his fate? Accept his fate? Nie Tian is a godly talent. Is he the kind of person who would accept his fate so easily? I think he's waiting for the right time to unleash his strongest attack. No one could understand what Nie Tian was doing at this moment. It was simply too bizarre. Nie Tian. Yu Luo stood outside the fighting ring. She was extremely nervous and her eyes were trembling. It was obvious that she was worried about Nie Tian. At the same time, on the fighting ring, Nie Tian stood where he was like a wooden pillar and did not move an inch. However, something mysterious was happening within his body. His sword intent was like rain that slowly melted into the formation of heaven. The force of heaven was like the spring rain that nourished his sword intent and stimulated it to become even more powerful. Why now? Ghost Emperor immediately understood what Nie Tian was doing and growled anxiously. Nie Tian seemed to have comprehended it and was melding his sword intent with the formation of heaven. Previously, Nie Tian had tried to do this but failed. Now that he was in the middle of a battle, he suddenly comprehended it. However, this was a life-or-death moment. Nie Tian was undoubtedly risking his life. Boom! Just then, a mountainous saber shadow rolled over and attacked the frozen space, releasing a bone-chilling saber intent. 100 meters. 50 meters. 10 meters. In the blink of an eye, the saber shadow had arrived beside Nie Tian and was about to devour him. Boom! At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly opened his eyes, which were as bright as the stars. He suddenly released his sword intent, which was like a landslide and a tsunami, crashing into the void. Pung pung pung. His sword intent was much stronger than before. The moment it was released, the frozen space directly collapsed. QL11 in the next moment, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on Nie Tian's back. He retreated abruptly and at the same time, slashed out with his sword. The sword was like a dragon and a monstrous sword intent bloomed in the air, releasing a dazzling brilliance. Boom! Immediately after, the saber and the sword collided, causing a deafening explosion in the air. Countless saber lights and sword shadows filled the air, transforming into a violent force that surged across the huge fighting ring. Boom boom boom! The saber intent and sword intent collided, causing endless explosions to resound in the air. Nie Tian retreated for a few thousand meters before stabilizing himself. However, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, but his face was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Dao Hanyu similarly retreated, but he only retreated about 100 meters before stabilizing himself. He wasn't injured in the slightest, but when he saw Nie Tian, his eyes couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed in shock. Chapter 3101. Nie Tian stood proudly in the air as sword will surged from his body. His eyes were filled with coldness and a fiery glow. Nie Tian, I did not expect you to make a breakthrough in the midst of a battle. It seems like I have underestimated you. Dao Hanyu's eyes narrowed as he spoke coldly. Nie Tian was filled with killing intent. He had not expected Nie Tian to make a breakthrough in the Sword Dao realm in that moment of life and death. QL11 It was because of Nie Tian's breakthrough in the Sword Dao that his sword will's strength increased by multiple folds, allowing him to break through Dao Hanyu's sword will. Nie Tian, you're making my heart race. Just then, Ghost Emperor's voice rang out. Although he was displeased, his tone was filled with excitement. He had not expected Nie Tian to be so daring as to make a breakthrough in the face of death. Nie Tian smiled faintly, a faint smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. I had no other choice but to fight to the death. At that moment, he had no other choice but to fight with his life on the line. Based on his sword will, there was no way he could go against Dao Hanyu. Only by improving his sword will would he be able to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Furthermore, he had to thank Dao Hanyu for making a breakthrough in that instant. Dao Hanyu's sword will was infused into his bloodline. This was similar to how Nie Tian had infused his sword will into his heavenly formation. Nie Tian had gained some enlightenment from Dao Hanyu's saber intent, which allowed him to successfully infuse his sword intent into the heavenly Dao formation. The heavenly formation had infused his sword will into his sword will, causing Nie Tian to make a breakthrough to the legendary Sword Soul realm. Nie Tian, who was at the legendary Sword Soul realm, was no match for Dao Hanyu. However, Nie Tian, who was at the legendary Sword Soul realm, was able to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Hiss! Only then did the spectators come to their senses. They all sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes. Dao Hanyu was scary, but Nie Tian was even scarier. He had forcefully made a breakthrough in the face of death. Nie Tian, it's just as you said, our battle has only just begun. At this moment, Dao Hanyu's lips curled into a cold smile as he said in a low voice, I don't care how talented you are. You are dead today. Really? Nie Tianling replied with a smile. He took a step forward, and the sword shadows around his body surged. They were released like mountains and seas, surging in the void, making him look like a giant sword that stood between the heavens and the earth. Humph! Dao Hanyu sneered. His eyes darkened and a black domineering saber appeared in his hand. It was his Yuan Ling saber, the Cold Rain Mystic Dragon Slash. Buzz! Following which, Dao Hanyu made his move. The Cold Rain Mysterious Dragon Slash slashed down ferociously. A towering saber intent was released like raging waves, pressing down on Nie Tian. The entire space shook violently, and even the heavens and earth shook. Kill! Nie Tian's eyes darkened. He showed no fear and chose to fight Dao Hanyu head-on. Boom! He slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, bursting with an incomparably majestic aura. Boom boom boom! Bang bang bang! In the next moment, the saber shadow and the sword shadow collided, and the void shook. Suddenly, an incomparably violent saber and sword wave surged in the sky, covering the entire space of the fighting ring. Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu's figures were drowned in it, and they could not even see their shadows. Bang bang bang! The crowd trembled as they watched the saber and sword shadows colliding in the sky. Endless waves of energy surged, as though they wanted to destroy the heavens and the earth. High up in the sky, in the midst of the endless waves of saber and sword energy, Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu stood tall like two mountains. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Dao Hanyu frowned, and his eyes trembled violently. He had not expected Nie Tian to be so strong. He was able to fight head-on with him, and was not at a disadvantage at all. Dao Hanyu, it seems like your strength is only SOSO after all, Nie Tian said coldly as he stared at Dao Hanyu. The more he fought, the stronger he became. Not only did his sword will merge with the heavenly Dao formation, it allowed Nie Tian's sword Dao to break through to the next level. More importantly, after the heavenly Dao formation merged with the sword will, it could continuously create more sword wills. This allowed Nie Tian to fight even more fiercely. How is this possible? Dao Hanyu looked at Nie Tian and frowned, his heart filled with doubt. After fighting for so long, his physical strength had already started to weaken. On the other hand, Nie Tian did not show any signs of weakening. Instead, he was getting stronger and stronger, and his aura was becoming more and more ferocious. You don't dare to fight anymore? Sensing Dao Hanyu's hesitation, Nie Tian sneered coldly as he made his move. The sword intent around his body surged to the maximum as he slashed out with his sword. The shadow of his sword was like a mountain, descending from the sky towards Dao Hanyu. So strong! The crowd exclaimed in shock as they watched the scene unfold in the sky. Nie Tian was already on the brink of death. Yet, after fighting for so long, he actually took the initiative to retaliate. This was unbelievable. Damn it! Dao Hanyu stared at the descending shadow of the sword as his eyes widened. With a low growl, he slashed out with the Cold Rain Mystical Dragon Slash. The tyrannical shadow of the sword caused the entire space to tremble. Boom! However, this slash of his was like an arrow at the end of its flight. The moment it collided with the shadow of the sword, the space around it exploded. Kill! 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 Dao Hanyu retreated 1,000 meters. Before he could even react, Nie Tian's roar reverberated through the air. It was incomparably ferocious and domineering. Boom! 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 Up in the sky, shadow after shadow of the sword could be seen. They were like dragons from the 9 heavens, swooping down from the clouds towards Dao Hanyu. Dao Hanyu furrowed his brows as his eyes trembled violently. He forcefully slashed out with the Cold Rain Mystical Dragon Slash to defend against the shadow of the sword. Boom! 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 Following a series of thunderous explosions, Dao Hanyu's body continued to sink downwards. Right now, Nie Tian had complete control of the situation. He did not give Dao Hanyu any chance to retaliate and continued to suppress him with his sword. In the air, the sword will raged like a hurricane. The entire fighting platform was filled with a chilly aura. However, this chilly aura continued to weaken. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Dao Hanyu's body fell towards the fighting platform. Every time Nie Tian slashed out with his sword, Dao Hanyu's body would fall 1,000 meters. Everyone's eyes trembled. They did not expect Nie Tian to be so strong. It's time for this battle to end. Right at this moment, in the air, Nie Tian's lips twitched as he muttered. His eyes were filled with coldness and killing intent. 9 limits of the starry sky, heaven slash. In the next moment, the sword will in his body surged to the maximum as he slashed out with his sword. Chapter 3102. I admit defeat. Boom. High up in the sky above the fighting ring, a sword shadow as large as a mountain came crashing down. Its murderous aura blossomed in an instant and pressed down on Dao Hanyu. No! At that moment, Dao Hanyu felt a real threat and screamed in horror as he looked at the sword shadow coming down from the sky. But it was already too late. Kaboom! Boom, boom, boom. At the moment of life and death, Dao Hanyu barely managed to swing his saber, but it was instantly drowned by the terrifying sword shadow and exploded in the air. Bang! The next moment, the sword shadow came crashing down, and with a dull thud, a blood-colored figure was smashed into the fighting ring, sinking deep into the ground. Kaboom! Then, the sword shadow hit the fighting ring, and the entire fighting ring shook violently. Terrifying cracks appeared, and the fighting ring seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The terrifying scene made everyone's eyes glaze over, and the scene fell into dead silence. After a long time, the sword will in the air disappeared, and the fighting ring was restored under the protection of the formation. But Dao Hanyu's figure was nowhere to be seen. On the huge fighting ring, there was only a silver-haired figure standing like a sword, as if Dao Hanyu had never existed and never stepped onto the fighting ring. At that moment, the crowd finally came to their senses and gasped, unable to put into words the shock in their hearts. In the battle between Dao Hanyu and Nie Tian, no one had expected that Dao Hanyu would end up with nothing left of his corpse. Nie Tian was just too terrifying. With the cultivation of a stage 9 demi-saint and the realm of the ultimate sword soul, he had slain a stage 5 demi-saint, a bloodline swordsman with the ultimate sword body. Floating high up in the sky, a faint smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth. Without saying anything, he blurred into action and left. Dao Hanyu was a terrifying opponent, but unfortunately, Nie Tian was even more terrifying. The battle between Nie Tian and Dao Hanyu had caused a commotion, and it took a long time for the crowd to calm down. Nie Tian did not pay much attention to the battles of the top 16. He had just broken through to the realm of the ultimate sword soul, and his control over the sword will was still not that good. Especially the formation of Heavenly Path, which he needed to learn more. The Ghost Emperor was right. The formation of Heavenly Path and the 9 shackles of Heavenly Path restricted Nie Tian's martial body, but also stimulated it. Then, Nie Tian entered the state of cultivation. 3 days later, the battle of the top 16 ended, and the top 8 of the Heavenly Path was decided. Among the top 8, there were 3 that deserved Nie Tian's attention: Shadow Flame Ruiner, Felicitous Rain, and Emo. Even though the other 4 were all at the 3rd grade and 4th grade, none of them posed a threat to Nie Tian. Although Emo was only a rank 1 pseudo-sage, he had fused with the Baleful Frost rune, so he was not to be underestimated. Before the top 8 of the top 8 of the 8 there, was, and the stage of the battle. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed, and the battle of the top 8 had begun. At this moment, the divine envoy of Heaven's Choice appeared high up in the sky and announced, the first match of the quarterfinals, Nie Tian vs. Emo. In the battle of the top 8, the Heaven's Chosen One no longer needed to use their name. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Among all his opponents, Emo was the one he did not want to meet the most. Unfortunately, he met Emo. In the sky, the heaven's chosen one looked at Nietian from afar and said with a smile, "Nietian, I want to see how the two of you are going to fight." She could tell that Nietian and Emo were friends, so she deliberately arranged for Nietian to be in a difficult position. At that moment, everyone turned to look at Nietian and Emo. Nietian and Emo are under the same doomsday messenger. They seem to have a good relationship. This battle is going to be interesting. Yeah, this battle between the two of them is not going to be easy. That Emo kid is definitely not Nietian's match. Why don't he just admit defeat? The crowd discussed with a strange look in their eyes. Emo, let's go up. Nietian smiled bitterly and turned to look at Emo. Of course, he could not ask Emo to admit defeat. After all, this was the battle of the heavens chosen one. It was an important opportunity for Emo. I admit defeat. Emo looked at Nietian and smiled calmly. Admit defeat? Nietian was stunned. He did not expect Emo to say that. Nietian, although I don't want to admit it, Emo took a step forward and said, "Your talent and strength are indeed above mine. I am not your match. I respect your choice." Nietian thought for a while and nodded. He was confident that he could defeat Emo, but he did not expect Emo to admit defeat. The heavens chosen one looked at Emo and Nietian cold from high up in the sky. Her delicate face was so gloomy that it looked like blood was going to drip out. Emo admitting defeat was not what she had expected. After all, this was the heavens chosen one, and there were so many people watching. Admitting defeat required great courage. The crowd was also surprised that Emo had admitted defeat. Although many people had guessed it, hearing it from Emo's own mouth was still shocking. Emo admitting defeat made the heavens chosen one very angry, but there was nothing she could do. She could only let the heavens chosen one continue. 3 days later, the battles of the top 8 were over. The top 4 of the heavens chosen one were Shadowfire Ruinous Star, Siu, Nietian, and Emoyen. Shadowfire Ruinous Star was the top genius of the Jueying Temple, so it was no surprise that he had entered the top 4. Siu was a big surprise. He had been hiding his strength and had fought his way into the top 4 as a dark horse. Nietian had shocked everyone time and time again on the heavens chosen one platform before finally entering the top 4. Emoyen was from the Rakshasa temple, and he was a one-armed martialist. It was a surprise that he had entered the top 4. Next, according to the rules of the Heavens Chosen One competition, the Heavens Chosen One envoy would rank the top 4 according to their previous performances. And the person who ranked first before the battle could choose his opponent. After a while, the Heavens Chosen One envoy announced the rankings. From first to fourth, they were Nietian, Shadowfire Ruinous Star, Siu, and Emoyen. No one was too surprised by the rankings. Although Nietian's cultivation was the weakest among the top 4, his performance on the Heavens Chosen One platform and the Doomsday Hunt was obvious to all. It was no surprise that he was ranked first. However, when Nietian heard the rankings, he was a little surprised. He had never thought that he would be ranked first. In the previous battles, the Heavens Chosen One envoy had chosen his opponent for him. This time, he could choose his own opponent. At that moment, the Heavens Chosen One envoy looked at Nietian and said, "Nietian, you can now choose any one of the other 3 as your opponent." At that moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on Nietian, waiting to see who Nietian would choose as his opponent. Shadowfire Ruinous Star, Siu, and Emoyen were all very strong. However, if all of them were to be compared, Devil Words was the weakest. Chapter 3103. Netherworld Demonic Dragon, Siu. As soon as Nietian's voice rang out, everyone gasped in shock. Emoyen was the weakest among the 3, but Nietian didn't choose him. Instead, he chose Siu. This confused the crowd. Upon hearing Nietian's voice from afar, Yuluo's beautiful eyes flickered involuntarily as a warm feeling rose in her heart. Nye Tian, did you choose felicitous rain to be your opponent because of me? Previously, Siyu had almost killed Yuluo. Now that Nye Tian chose Siyu, Yuluo couldn't help but feel that Nye Tian wanted to avenge her. Indeed, this was one of the reasons why Nye Tian chose Siyu. But more importantly, Nye Tian felt a strong killing intent from Siyu. And he really wanted to see how strong the soul-devouring curse of the soul-devouring ghost clan was. Nye Tian, it seems like you think I'm a pushover. At this moment, Siyu appeared on the fighting stage. His eyes were as cold as a snake's as he stared at Nye Tian. You will soon find out that you made the wrong choice. Is that so? Nye Tian laughed. His silhouette flickered as he stepped onto the fighting stage. Shadowflame Ruinous Star stared at Nye Tian on the fighting stage. His eyes were filled with a strong killing intent. He had expected that Nye Tian wouldn't choose him. At this moment, he hoped that Nye Tian would be able to defeat Siyu instead of dying in Siyu's hands. He wanted to kill Nye Tian with his own hands. The battle intent on the fighting stage was intense. Nye Tianling stood in the air. Sword intent surged from his body, making him look like a gigantic sword. On the other hand, Siyu's face was cold. His small eyes flickered with a cold light. His body was covered in a rain of blood. Die. In the next moment, Siyu didn't hesitate. He roared and released his killing intent. 9 blood curtains appeared around him. They were red and violent, as if they wanted to devour the heavens and earth. Sword cutting 8 desolation. Nye Tian knew how terrifying the blood rain was. His expression darkened as he unleashed the starlight heaven slash. His battle intent surged, and a terrifying sword image rushed towards the 9 blood rain curtains. Bang! Bang! The shadow of the sword was like a dragon, incomparably violent. It directly broke through the 9 curtains of blood rain and pressed down on felicitous rain. But at this moment, Shigur's figure suddenly swayed and vanished into thin air. Nye Tian frowned. He immediately sensed that something was wrong and his expression changed. Nye Tian, can you break the Yellow Springs blood rain? In the next instant, Shi Yu's sinister voice reverberated through the air, following which the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier appeared, enveloping the entire battle platform. The fighting ring, which was tens of thousands of meters wide, was filled with blood rain, which made people feel extremely oppressed. It's that blood-colored barrier again. When everyone saw this scene, their eyes violently trembled and they cried out in horror. Previously, Shigur had already used the Yellow Springs blood rain and almost killed Yuluo. If it wasn't for Yuluo forcefully activating the Myriad Universe Saint Seal, she most likely would have died in the hands of Shigur. Oh no! Yuluo's beautiful eyes trembled and her heart sank. She had personally experienced the Yellow Springs blood rain and knew how terrifying this barrier was. She was very worried that Nye Tian wouldn't be able to break the blood rain barrier. You want to trap me with a small barrier? What a joke! At this moment, Nye Tian's incomparably arrogant voice resounded on the fighting ring. Arrogant! Shigur's voice resounded. Immediately after, within the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier, a sky full of blood rain appeared and turned into numerous sharp blades, enveloping towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian felt the violent aura of the blood rain in the space. It was like maggots attached to his body and wanted to devour the power of his bloodline. Boom! At this moment, his body shook and a towering sword momentum was released. Immediately, the endless blood rain was pushed back by him. How is this possible? The sudden scene caused Shigur to cry out in surprise. Obviously, he was extremely shocked. The Yellow Springs blood rain barrier had a strong suppressive force on cultivators. Even Yuluo, who cultivated the Myriad Universe devouring art, was suppressed. Why was Nye Tian not suppressed at all? 9 limits of starry sky, earth split. At this moment, Nye Tianling spoke coldly and slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, releasing a terrifying force. Hua! In just an instant, the huge Yellow Springs blood rain barrier shook and was directly broken. Bang! Then, with a muffled sound, a figure was sent flying, drawing a bloody trail in the air. Shigeru! When the crowd saw the figure's face clearly, their eyes couldn't help but tremble as they shouted the person's name. At this moment, the person who was sent flying was Shigeru. In the next moment, the crowd's gaze immediately shifted to Nye Tian. They were incomparably shocked. Just now, Nye Tian was trapped in the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier by Shigeru, but he was actually able to break the barrier and seriously injure Shigeru. It was really unbelievable. Idiot! How can the Yellow Springs blood rain barrier suppress the power of the stars? Heaven's chosen one, who was high up in the sky, frowned and said with a cold heart. In addition to the terrifying devouring force of the blood rain, the most terrifying thing about Shigeru's Yellow Springs blood rain barrier was that it could suppress a cultivator's strength. However, Nye Tian was a person who possessed the Star Essence Stone. Ordinary barriers couldn't suppress the power of the stars at all. What kind of power do you have in your body? How can you ignore the suppression of the Yellow Springs blood rain? On the fighting ring, Shigeru steadied his body, his eyes trembling as he asked in surprise. For a dead man, is there any need to know the answer? Nye Tianling laughed and took a step forward, releasing his sword intent crazily. He could ignore the suppression of the Yellow Springs blood rain because of the Star Essence Stone and the Heavenly Path formation. At this moment, his martial body and the Heavenly Path formation had fused together. His blood vessels were filled with the power of the Heavenly Path, which had great resistance against the barrier. Therefore, Shigeru's Yellow Springs blood rain barrier posed no threat to Nye Tian. Nye Tian, do you think I only have the Yellow Springs blood rain? Shigeru's eyes darkened, then he calmed down and said coldly, You can't imagine what I'm capable of. Today you must die. As his cold voice fell, Shigeru raised his arm and a blood-red vortex appeared on his palm. He threw it out and it exploded in the air. Roar. Then, a deep roar came from the blood-red vortex. A giant black beast appeared, roaring crazily and releasing a violent aura. Nye Tian looked at the giant black beast and his eyes narrowed. He didn't expect Shigeru to have such a strange skill. The giant black beast was more than 1,000 meters long, like a giant crocodile. Its body was covered with horny scales that looked extremely hard, like an upside-down sword. On the top of the giant beast's head, there was a huge black horn that emitted a violent aura. Yellow Springs demonic dragon, tear him apart. At this moment, Shigeru's mouth twitched and he said coldly. Chapter 3104. Bloody Slaughter. Die. On the fighting ring, Shiryu let out a low roar. The netherworld demonic dragon swung its forearms and a violent aura filled the air. Its face was covered in scales and looked extremely ferocious. Boom! The giant claw descended with terrifying strength that seemed to be able to tear the void apart. The oppressive force made the void rumble. Nye Tian frowned and slashed with his sword while retreating at the same time. Bang! In the air, the netherworld demonic dragon's giant claw descended and shattered Nye Tian's sword shadow. The netherworld demonic dragon's body was extremely terrifying and its strength was terrifying. It forcefully shattered the sword shadow. Nye Tian retreated 1,000 meters. He narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, You beast, your skin is really thick. Boom. Before he finished his sentence, he slashed with his sword. A 10,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared in the air and slashed at the netherworld demonic dragon. Roar. The demonic dragon was not afraid. It roared and rolled its huge body in the air at an extremely fast speed. The giant horn on its head charged at Yifutian. Boom. The giant horn was extremely hard. It collided with the sword's shadow and shattered it. Nye Tian frowned. He did not expect the netherworld demonic dragon to be so powerful. Boom. In the next moment, The Yellow Springs demonic dragon charged at Nyetian and swung its huge claws at him. 9 limits of starry sky, heavenly slash. Nyetian frowned. The sword intent in his body surged to the extreme, and he slashed with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a wild dragon that was about to drown the netherworld demonic dragon. Bang! However, when the sword's shadow landed on the netherworld demonic dragon's body, it suddenly paused and then shattered. Nyetian used the recoil force to dodge the netherworld demonic dragon's sharp claws. This big guy's body is too strong. I can't penetrate it at all. Nyetian stabilized himself in the air and said with a frown. The netherworld demonic dragon's scales were extremely hard. Its body was as tough as a heaven-rank devourer. His sword shadows bombarded the netherworld demonic dragon, but they were completely ineffective. Nyetian, is this all you've got? And at this moment, Shigur's voice rang out. It was incomparably cold as he said, "Why don't you let me find a few more opponents for you?" Roar, roar. As soon as he finished speaking, 2 deep roars came from the blood-colored vortex. Then, 2 more Yellow Springs demonic dragons appeared. Oh no! Nyetian couldn't help but frown and cry out in his heart. 1 netherworld demonic dragon was already difficult enough to deal with. Now that 2 more had appeared, he was undoubtedly in a difficult situation. 3 netherworld demonic dragons. Can you stop them? Sure Yu's eyes were cold as he said viciously. Roar. At this moment, the 3 netherworld demonic dragons let out deep roars at the same time. A layer of blood-colored runes appeared on their terrifying bodies, causing their auras to become even more violent. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, the 3 netherworld demonic dragons moved at the same time. They charged madly at Nyetian from 3 different directions. They were extremely fast and ruthless. Nyetian narrowed his eyes. The astral soul wings appeared on his back, and he immediately retreated. Even if his martial physique was strong, it was impossible for him to face the netherworld demonic dragons head-on. Do you think you can escape? Yu's eyes were fixed on Nyetian. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he sneered. Nyetian's speed was fast, but the netherworld demonic dragons were even faster. In the blink of an eye, the 3 demonic dragons were only a few hundred meters away from Nyetian. At this moment, Nyetian's expression changed slightly when he sensed the terrifying aura of the netherworld demonic dragons. In the next moment, he activated the heavenly water pole Yuan armor and the astral soul shield. At the same time, he nimbly dodged the attacks with strange footwork and dashed toward one of the netherworld demonic dragons. What's Nyetian doing? The scene in the fighting ring caused everyone to exclaim in shock and confusion. Nyetian did not retreat. Instead, he dashed toward the netherworld demonic dragons. Isn't he courting death? The netherworld demonic dragons were extremely strong. If their claws hit Nyetian head-on, he would be severely injured even if he survived. You're courting death. Yu's eyes darkened when he saw Nyetian dashing toward him. Roar! The 3 netherworld demonic dragons roared in unison. The blood-colored runes on their bodies flickered and released blood-colored ripples. Seeing this, Nyetian's eyes narrowed, and the corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. He noticed that the blood-colored runes on the netherworld demonic dragons' bodies were gathered in a depression on the dragon's abdomen. This depression was the netherworld demonic dragon's weakness. Bang bang bang! Nyetian activated the astral soul shield to block the attacks from the blood-colored runes in the air. He moved swiftly toward one of the netherworld demonic dragons. Seeing this scene, Shigur suddenly reacted, and his eyes couldn't help but darken. He did not expect Nyetian to find the netherworld demonic dragon's weakness so quickly. Boom! At that moment, Nyetian arrived in front of one of the Yellow Springs demonic dragons. A hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he thrust the star heavenly slash forward. A sword shadow with extreme sharpness slashed towards the Yellow Springs demonic dragon's abdomen. Boom! In the next moment the sword's shadow fell. A muffled sound came from the sky. The netherworld demonic dragon was pierced through by the huge sword shadow. In an instant the sky was drenched in blood. It was an extremely tragic scene. Roar! Roar! At the same time, the other two demonic dragons roared and charged toward Nyetian. Their eyes were extremely ferocious like a bloody abyss. They were less than 1,000 meters away from Nyetian. At such a close distance there was no way he could dodge. Bang! At this critical moment, Nyetian moved his body slightly to the side to avoid the netherworld demonic dragon's frontal attack. However, he was affected by the powerful impact and was sent flying. In midair, Nyetian flapped his wings and stabilized himself. His body was drenched in blood. There was a bone-deep wound on his chest. Blood kept gushing out. The netherworld demonic dragon was too powerful. If Nyetian had been hit directly, he would have been a corpse. But now, he was also heavily injured. Ha! Nyetian, you're dead meat. Sure, you laughed maniacally when he saw Nyetian was injured. His eyes were vicious and excited, as if he could already see the scene of Nyetian being killed by the netherworld demonic dragon. Is that so? At this moment, the corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched. Then, he moved. In midair, sword intent burst out from his body. Sure, you looked at Nyetian and couldn't help but exclaim. He didn't expect that Nyetian would dare to take the initiative to attack when he was heavily injured. Sacred heaven-defying sword, heavenly sword reverses the sun. In midair, Nyetian's figure flashed like a bolt of lightning. As his deep voice echoed out, his flesh aura surged and his sword intent reached its limit. Roar! Roar! The two netherworld demonic dragons seemed to feel threatened. They roared and charged toward Nyetian. Boom! Boom! In the next instant, Nyetian lashed out with his sword. A 10,000-meter-long blood-colored sword shadow appeared in the air. It split into two and struck at the fatal spots of the two netherworld demonic dragons. Chapter 3105. Kill you with one strike. High up in the sky, Nyetian's figure appeared under the cover of a blood-red light. His body seemed to be bathed in blood, and his eyes were bloodshot, as if he was the god of death who had just walked out of hell. He killed two netherworld demonic dragons with one strike. How is this possible? Everyone was taken aback by the scene in the fighting ring. They looked at Nyetian with fear in their eyes. Just now, Nyetian was forced to retreat by one netherworld demonic dragon, but after being injured, he killed two netherworld demonic dragons with one strike. The difference in strength was too big. Could it be that Nyetian had been hiding his strength from the beginning? How can your strike be so powerful? On the fighting ring, Sure Yu's eyes trembled as he shouted in shock. Unconcealable fear appeared on his face. Your netherworld demonic dragons are gone. What else do you have? Nyetian ignored him. Sword essence surged from his body like a sharp blade, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The reason why Nyetian was able to kill the two demonic dragons with a single strike just now was because he had used his most powerful sword move, Heavenly Sword Reverses Sunday. Moreover, he had discovered that the power of the Heavenly Tao formation had increased significantly under the stimulation of his blood chi. This had also allowed his sword intent to rise abruptly. Another important reason was that Nyetian had discovered the weakness of the netherworld demonic dragon. If he had not hit the vital part of the netherworld demonic dragon, he might not have been able to kill it with one strike. Nyetian, your strength has exceeded my expectations, but you can't win this battle. Sure Yu's eyes darkened, and he became much calmer. His whole body was emitting a gloomy aura. Is that so? Nyetianling laughed. His figure moved like lightning, and in an instant, he slashed out with his sword. The mountain-like sword shadow shrouded Sure Yu. Sure Yu's eyes narrowed, and he formed a seal with his hands. Boom! Immediately, the blood-red vortex in the air sensed it and let out a low rumble in the air. Then, a huge tombstone appeared and let out a rumbling sound in the air. Bang! In the void, the tombstone that was like a mountain fell, directly bombarding the huge sword shadow. In an instant, the sword shadow collapsed, and a violent sword will surged in the space, extremely sharp. Feeling the immense pressure, Nyetian could not help but frown. His expression changed as he retreated 1,000 meters away. Nyetian, this Yellow Springs tombstone was erected for you. Prepare to die. Up in the sky, Felicitous Rain let out a fierce roar, his eyes filled with intense killing intent. Do you think a tombstone can kill me? Nye Tianling replied with a smile. His figure suddenly moved, and the sword will all over his body exploded to the extreme. Inside his body, the color of blood surged, the heavenly path formation fused with the sword will, and the power of the sword will was stimulated to the extreme. Boundless sword intent aura, sharp as a blade, made Nye Tian look like a violent giant sword, standing tall in the sky, as if it could kill everything. At this time, Nye Tian's eyes were burning with excitement. He had a new understanding of the heavenly path formation. Yellow Spring Tombstone, Yellow Spring Blood Burial. At this time, Shiryu roared, and the huge Yellow Spring Tombstone came crashing down. In the void, streams of blood spring were released, and like a raging wave, they enveloped Nye Tian. Boom! 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 Then, in the sky, the streams of blood spring condensed into a huge blood-red hand, releasing an extremely bloody aura, and spread towards Nye Tian. This person is so scary. Seeing this scene, the crowd could not help but tremble violently, and they exclaimed. Shiryu's strength was beyond everyone's expectations, evil and powerful. The aura released by the huge blood-red hands was really like the Yellow Spring, giving people a great pressure. If a warrior below the half-saint realm was under the pressure of the Yellow Spring Tombstone, they would directly explode and die. At this time, the crowd could not help but worry for Nye Tian. Although Nye Tian's combat ability was strong, he was still only a rank 9 demi-saint. Could he withstand such violent blood spring? Humph! Is this all you've got? In the sky above the battle platform, Nye Tian looked at the huge blood-red hands that were surging towards him like a raging wave, but he smiled coldly. There was no fear in his eyes, but deep contempt and a strong desire to fight. The next moment, his figure moved, and the sword will all over his body was sharp and murderous. Every sword will aura was as sharp as a blade, as if it could destroy everything. 8 Desolation Sword. In the air, Nye Tian's mouth twitched and he murmured. Starry Sky Slash was unleashed, and a 10,000-meter-long sword shadow appeared in the void, its aura incomparably majestic, and the sword waves shot into the sky. Boom! Bam bam bam! The sword shadow was like a giant beast, rushing into the sky full of blood-red hands. The blood spring directly exploded in the sky, and the endless smell of blood spread in all directions, filling the whole fighting ring. The battle platform that was tens of thousands of meters in circumference had turned into a sea of blood, and it looked extremely terrifying and frightening. How is this possible? Shigeru's eyes trembled as he watched the blood spring shatter, and he could not help but cry out in shock. He did not expect that Nye Tian's strength had reached such a level that he could even break the Yellow Springs blood burial unleashed by the Yellow Springs tombstone. The Yellow Springs tombstone, is it? Break. It was at this moment that Nye Tian, who was standing on the sea of blood, had a murderous look in his eyes. With a low roar, he directly swung his sword, and the sword shadow that was as violent as a dragon blasted towards the Yellow Springs tombstone. No! Shigeru's eyes trembled, and he immediately sensed that something was wrong. But it was all too late. Boom! Bam bam bam! The moment the sword shadow landed, there was a loud bang in the air, and the huge Yellow Springs tombstone that was as huge as a mountain collapsed. And in the next instant, the sea of blood on the battle platform disappeared. In the air, Nye Tian's figure stood coldly, like a sword god descending to the world. But at this moment the corner of his mouth twitched, and without any hesitation, his figure instantly moved, and he directly rushed towards Shigyur. Shigyur, your methods are strange, but your true strength is definitely not this strong. I can kill you with one sword. In the void, Nye Tion's voice sounded, and it was as cold as killing, like a death knell, ringing in Shigyur's ears. When Shigyur used the Yellow Springs tombstone just now, he could already tell that Shigyur's strength was only at the third stage pseudo-sage. The realm of a third stage pseudo-sage was much higher than Nye Tion, but in front of Nye Tion, it was completely insufficient. Nye Tion, you. In an instant, Shigyur felt the aura of death approaching, and his pair of beady eyes trembled in horror, and he screamed in horror. But he did not have the chance to finish his sentence, and his voice was abruptly cut off by the sword shadow. Boom! The sword shadow landed, and the entire battle platform shook, as though it was about to collapse. Shigyur's figure was engulfed by the sword shadow, and not even his bones were left. Chapter 3106. One soul with two bodies. After a long while, the crowd came to their senses. Their eyes were still trembling as they looked at Nye Tion. No one had expected Nye Tion to be so powerful that he could kill Shiryu with a single stroke of his sword. Although Shiryu's skills were strange, his own strength did not seem to be very strong. This made the crowd confused. Above the fighting ring, after killing Shiryu, Nye Tion did not look relaxed. His eyes were fixed on the blood-red vortex in the air. He was surprised that the blood-red vortex did not disappear after Shiryu's death. It seemed that the blood-red vortex was being controlled by an unknown force. Nye Tion frowned and tried to get closer to the blood-red vortex. He immediately felt a strong smell of blood. As he got closer, he found that the smell of blood did not disappear. Instead, it became stronger. Could it be? Nye Tion was even more confused. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's surprised voice was heard. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "One soul with two bodies." One soul with two bodies? Hearing the Ghost Emperor's words, Nye Tion's eyes narrowed and his expression changed. He did not understand what the Ghost Emperor meant. Nye Tion. Right at this moment, a gloomy and low voice suddenly sounded out from within the blood-red vortex, and it resounded through space and revealed traces of coldness that seemed like slaughter. The sudden voice made Nye Tion's eyes narrow and he exclaimed in surprise. He had not expected a voice to come from the blood-red vortex. The voice was different from Shiryu's, but it seemed to have the same aura. It was very strange. The crowd outside the fighting ring was also shocked by the strange scene on the fighting ring. Their faces were filled with fear. What's that voice? Why is it so strange? Shiryu is clearly dead. Could it be that there is someone else in the blood-red vortex? Could it be that Shiryu is still alive and has been hiding in the blood-red vortex? The crowd discussed among themselves. The fear in their eyes became more and more intense. This scene was so strange that no one had expected it to happen. Looking at the blood-colored vortex, Nye Tion calmed down and asked with a grim look in his eyes, "Who are you?" "Nye Tion, I will remember you. We will meet again." The deep voice came from the blood-colored vortex again. It did not answer Nye Tion. Instead, it left behind a threat and then disappeared. Nye Tion frowned, a confused expression on his face. Who was the person in the blood-colored vortex? Nye Tion, I'm afraid you've provoked a powerful person. At that moment the Ghost Monarch's voice resounded. I never thought that the soul of this fellow from the Soul Eater tribe would be this powerful. Ghost Emperor, what do you mean by one soul and two bodies? Nye Tion frowned and could not help but ask. One soul two bodies is a forbidden technique of the Soul Devourer Ghost clan. The Ghost Monarch explained, the Soul Devourer tribe's bloodline power is the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse, which can seize souls. The one soul and two bodies technique is the most suitable evil technique for the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse. When the Soul Devourer Ghost Curse reaches a certain level, Those who cultivate one soul and two bodies can split their souls and occupy two martial bodies at the same time. This. Nye Tian frowned and his face stiffened when he heard the ghost monarch's words. He had already understood. The so-called one soul and two bodies technique meant that the same soul would possess two martial bodies. Nye Tian, the martialist you just killed, was a person who cultivated the one soul and two bodies technique. Siyu was only one of his soul bodies. The person hiding behind the blood-colored vortex is the other soul body, the ghost monarch said in a deep voice. Ghost monarch, will killing this soul body affect the other soul body? Nye Tian frowned and could not help but ask. For a cultivator with one soul and two bodies, when one soul body is killed, the soul devourer ghost curse will return to the other soul body. Even the bloodline power that the soul devourer ghost curse absorbed will return. The ghost monarch replied to Nye Tian, this way, not only will the other soul body not be harmed, but the other soul body will also become stronger after absorbing the soul devourer ghost curse. Therefore, if you see Siyu's other soul body, its strength will definitely be much stronger than Siyu. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as his lips curled into a bitter smile. He had not expected Siyu to be a cultivator with one soul and two bodies. It seemed like this guy was a genius of the soul devourer tribe. No wonder Siyu dared to kill Yulua in front of the three Rakshasa kings. He was not afraid of dying here. A cultivator with one soul and two bodies was indeed very rare. Nye Tian remembered Siyu's name in his heart. Although Siyu had only lost one soul body, he had still lost this battle. Nye Tian had successfully advanced to the next round. What awaited him next was the final battle. Next up was the second battle of the top four, Shadowfire Ruinous Star vs. Demon Yen. Nye Tian, you did not disappoint me. You made it to the end. Shadowfire Ruinous Star moved, but he did not immediately step onto the stage. Instead, he came to Nye Tian's side and stared at Nye Tian with a pair of gloomy eyes. Among all the chosen ones, the one who can kill you is me. Only I can. Hee hee. Nye Tian looked at Shadowfire Ruinous Star and said with a faint smile, Shadowfire Ruinous Star, defeat your opponent first. Then you can decide if you can kill me or not. My opponent? Shadowfire Ruinous Star sneered. He then turned to look at Demon Yen, who was already standing on the stage. Without any hesitation, he shouted, this piece of trash, I only need one move to kill him. Everyone's expressions darkened when they heard Shadowfire Ruinous Star's words. Shadowfire Ruinous Star is too arrogant. Demon Yen is a member of Rakshasa Temple. Moreover, his strength has already reached the Tier 4 Pseudo-Saint standard. Even if he isn't a match for Shadowfire Ruinous Star, there's no way he can be killed in one move. That's right. Although Demon Yan's performance in the previous battles wasn't eye-catching, he was still very powerful. It won't be easy for Shadowfire Ruinous Star to defeat him. I don't think so. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's strength is already at the Tier 6 Pseudo-Saint standard. He definitely has the strength to kill Demon Yen in one move. Everyone was talking excitedly. Shadowfire Ruinous Star, you are too arrogant. At this time, Mo Yan's loud voice resounded in the fighting ring. You will soon pay the price for your arrogance. Shadowfire Ruinous Star had called Demon Yen trash in front of so many people and wanted to kill him in one move. How could he not be angry? Boom. The instant Demon Yan's voice fell, he took a step forward. Immediately, a terrifying power erupted from his severed arm. Chapter 3107. In the fighting ring, Mo Yan's severed arm suddenly released an extremely violent force. What a powerful force! Sensing this force, everyone's eyes couldn't help but tremble as they exclaimed. Boom! 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 Then, Mo Yan's severed arm began to tremble and release a powerful force that formed visible energy ripples in the air. It was extremely terrifying. Nye Tian couldn't help but frown when he felt this power. He said in a deep voice, Ward. What Mo Yen had unleashed at that moment was actually a very powerful spirit power. His severed arm is indeed strange. It's a powerful seal, Nie Tian said in a deep voice as he realized what was going on. He had sensed a strange aura from Mo Yan's severed arm earlier, but he did not expect it to be a severed arm. It's indeed a seal. At the same time, the Ghost Emperor said, "This guy is very strong-willed to seal his severed arm and condense his strength. This method is almost self-mutilation. However, the moment the seal on his severed arm is undone, his strength will erupt instantly and he will break through to a new realm. I speculate that when the seal on his severed arm is completely undone, his strength will directly increase by 2 or even 3 levels." Nie Tian's eyes widened upon hearing the Ghost Emperor's words. Boom! The moment the Ghost Emperor's voice fell, Mo Yan's entire body released a powerful aura. It was boundlessly majestic, and everyone present could clearly feel an extremely terrifying aura. Then, Mo Yan's severed arm grew out in an instant. His aura began to skyrocket in an instant. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. Under the gaze of countless people, Mo Yan's strength skyrocketed by 3 levels in an instant, from a level 4 pseudo-sacred to a level 7 pseudo-sacred. The Ghost Emperor was right. Mo Yan was using self-mutilation to seal his severed arm and condense his strength. When the seal was broken, he would seek a breakthrough. How is this possible? The crowd was extremely shocked when they saw the scene on the fighting ring. The strength of a pseudo-saint cultivator soared by 3 ranks in an instant. If not for the fact that he had witnessed it with his own eyes, he would not have believed it. Then, the crowd came to their senses and began to exclaim, "Oh my God! Mo Yan's strength has actually risen to the 7th stage pseudo-saint realm. How terrifying! Demonward's cultivation is already higher than Shadow Flame Ruinous Stars. It looks like it's hard to say who will emerge victorious in this battle." This demonic words is indeed powerful. He has been hiding his strength all this time. It turns out that he is the strongest of all the heaven's chosen ones. Everyone's eyes trembled as they were shocked by Mo Yan's strength. The eyes of everyone from the 10 directions Rakshasa Palace were blazing with excitement. Mo Yan's increase in strength was terrifying, even exceeding the expectations of Huangchu, Eli, and the others. On the other side, the people from Juying Palace looked serious. They were obviously worried about Shadowfire Ruinous Star. The battle between Mo Yan and Shadowflame Army Breaker was not just a battle between the two of them, nor was it a battle between Heaven's Choice. On a certain level, it was also a clash between the 2 superpowers, 10 Directions Rakshasa Temple and Juying Temple. The 2 of them represented the faces of the 2 temples. However, the Lord of Juying Temple, Ing Qianyu, looked very calm. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile as he thought to himself, "It's impossible to fight against the army breaker with such strength." Ing Qianyu knew very well how strong Shadowflame Ruinous Star was. A mere Mo Yan was no match for the army breaker. "Shadowflame Ruinous Star, do you still dare to say that you can defeat me in one move?" At this moment, Mo Yan stepped forward on the battle platform. His aura was imposing as he spoke loudly. His eyes were insufferably arrogant. Everyone's eyes trembled as they immediately looked at Shadowflame Ruinous Star. When Shadowflame Ruinous Star had said that he could kill Mo Yan in one move, he had some strength. But now that Mo Yan's strength had reached the 7th stage pseudo-saint realm, if Shadowflame Ruinous Star still said that, he would be too arrogant. "Mo Yan, your strength has indeed exceeded my expectations." Shadowflame Ruinous Star looked at Mo Yan and smiled faintly. "But I will still only need one move to kill you." His voice was indifferent, but it was filled with extreme arrogance. "Shadowflame Ruinous Star, you are too arrogant." Mo Yan was thoroughly enraged after being looked down upon once again. He let out a low roar that was incomparably violent. "Humph!" Shadowflame Ruinous Star smiled faintly. He then moved, hovering above the battle platform. His aura was as vast as the mountains and as vast as the seas. He looked down at Emoyen and said in a cold tone, "Emoyen, it is not that I am too arrogant, but you are too weak. Shut up." Emoyen was thoroughly enraged. He let out a roar and his silhouette moved. He slapped out with his palm as tens of thousands of demonic runes appeared in the void, transforming into ghostly shadows that instantly enveloped the entire battle platform. At this moment, the crowd heard incomparably mournful wails, as if countless ghosts were suffering from extreme torture within the endless ghostly shadows. So strong! As expected of a seventh stage pseudo-saint expert. The eyes of the crowd trembled in shock. Emoyen was able to erupt with such terrifying strength in an instant, causing the crowd to be extremely shocked. Humph! Shadow Flame Ruinous Star felt the pressure pressing down on him, but he still laughed and said, "Emoyen, is that all you have?" His voice wasn't loud, but when it landed in Emoyen's ears, it was like a sharp blade, extremely piercing. Courting death. Emoyen roared like a crazed demonic beast. Suddenly, the ghostly shadows in the void became abnormally violent, like a raging tsunami, pressing down on Shadow Flame Ruinous Star. Army Destroyer Magic Armor, activate! At this moment, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star roared in a low voice. His body trembled as a heaven-defying aura surged up, like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. Violent energy instantly enveloped his entire body, condensing into an incomparably huge giant. Army Destroyer Magic Armor. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star didn't give Emoyen any chance to retaliate and directly used his strongest trump card. Die. In the next instant, Shadow Flame Ruiner's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he let out a bestial roar. His aura surged, and he punched out with his Army Destroyer Magic Armor, sending a violent wave of energy towards the endless stream of ghosts. Boom, 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 boom. Following which, the huge fist landed, and a destructive power erupted. The ghostly shadows were like leaves in a storm, collapsing one after another. Don't kill me! At this moment, Emoyen felt the real aura of death approaching. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his heart was filled with extreme fear. Even in his dreams, he didn't expect Shadow Flame Ruinous Star's strength to be this strong. He wanted to resist, he didn't want to die, but at this moment it was all too late. Boom! In the next moment, the huge fist landed with a loud bang, directly engulfing Emoyen's body, and then heavily smashed into the fighting ring. The whole fighting ring shook violently, and then a huge crater with a radius of 1,000 meters appeared, with huge cracks all around. Chapter 3108. A pinnacle battle outside the platform. Everyone was shocked by the scene before them. Their eyes trembled, and they could not react for a long time. Who would have thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's strength had reached such a level? One punch, just one punch, and he had killed Emoyen. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's punch had nearly destroyed the entire platform. One could imagine how powerful it was. Out of all the battles in the Heaven's Choice contest, this was the first time the platform had suffered the most damage. Even with the protection of the array, it took a long time for the platform to recover. Is this the strength of a genius from the Rakshasa temple? At this time, Shadowfire Ruinous Star spoke up without any hesitation. A piece of trash. His voice was very loud, clearly meant for the people from the Rakshasa temple to hear. The eyes of the 3 Rakshasa kings burned with rage. Every word from Shadowfire Ruinous Star was like a slap to their faces. They had never thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's strength would reach such a level. One had to know that Emoyen was a 7th-level pseudosage, yet he had been killed by Shadowfire Ruinous Star with one punch. Didn't that mean that Shadowfire Ruinous Star's current strength was close to a 9th-level pseudosage? Outside the platform, Nye Tion stared at Shadowfire Ruinous Star, unable to conceal his shock. He had never thought that Shadowfire Ruinous Star would be so strong. Back in the Doomsday Forest, Shadowfire Ruinous Star had clearly not been this strong. But now, it seemed like he had suddenly become stronger. Shadowfire Ruinous Star's domineering killing of Mo Yen had thoroughly shocked everyone. However, he didn't leave the fighting ring. Instead, he stared at Nye Tian, who was outside the fighting ring, with a vicious and cold glint in his eyes. He shouted, "Nye Tian, there are only 2 of us left. Let's fight." Nye Tian frowned, staring at Shadowfire Ruinous Star. Originally, after the Battle of the Top 4, they could rest for 3 days to allow the Chosen Ones to recover their strength and reach their peak. But Shadowfire Ruinous Star had directly provoked Nye Tian and wanted to fight. Shadowflame Ruinous Star's provocation stunned everyone, and they immediately started discussing it. Shadowflame Ruinous Star is too strong. If Nye Tian accepts the challenge now, he'll just be throwing his life away. So what if Nye Tian doesn't accept the challenge now? Could it be that he'll be a match for Shadowflame Army Breaker in 3 days? Yeah, Nye Tian is really in danger this time. No matter how talented he is only a stage 9 demi-saint. There is no way he can fight Shadowflame Ruinous Star. As they spoke, they looked at Nye Tian with pity, and even pity in their eyes. In their eyes, Nye Tian was already a corpse. Nye Tian, are you afraid? At this moment, Shadowflame Ruiner once again provoked Nye Tian when he saw that Nye Tian wasn't replying. Afraid? Nye Tian frowned and laughed. I'm afraid that you will die a horrible death. As he spoke, he moved and stepped onto the platform. Shadowflame Ruinous Star had dug out Rui Qianyu's 9-colored pupils. This incident was like a poisonous thorn that made Nye Tian very upset. Only by killing Shadowflame Ruinous Star would he be able to rest easy. Seeing Nye Tian stepping onto the fighting ring, everyone's eyes trembled with astonishment. Nye Tian is really going on stage. Is he tired of living? It's not wise to go on stage at this time. It's better to fight in 3 days. Nye Tian is already a stage 9 demi-saint. Who knows, he might be able to break through in 3 days. The crowd was talking and shaking their heads. They all thought that Nye Tian was too impulsive and should not have gone on stage at this time. If he fought in 3 days, he would at least be able to live for another 3 days. High up in the sky, the Saint Envoy of Heaven's Choice frowned and wanted to say something, but he held back. Since both Shadowflame Ruinous Star and Nye Tian wanted to fight immediately, of course it was fine. On the platform, Shadowflame Ruinous Star looked at Nye Tian and smiled cold, his eyes filled with murderous intent. Nye Tian, I thought you were smart. I didn't expect you to be such an idiot. Shadowflame Ruinous Star, have you forgotten? How did you die in my hands in the Doomsday Jungle? This time, I will let you die a horrible death. Nye Tianling replied with a smile. Starlight Heaven's slash appeared in his hand, and his entire body surged with sword will. Courting death. Shadowflame Ruinous Star was enraged when he heard Nye Tian's words. He roared and activated his Army Destroyer magic armor again. A terrifying aura spread out and filled the entire platform. The Army Destroyer magic armor is indeed powerful. Nye Tian frowned as he felt the aura of the Army Destroyer magic armor. The Army Destroyer magic armor was over 10,000 meters long, and was incomparably terrifying. Even the platform seemed tiny in comparison. Die for me. At this moment, Shadowflame Ruinous Star roared and punched out in the direction of Nye Tian. Bzzz. The strength of the Army Destroyer magic armor was simply too strong. A single punch from it caused the entire space to tremble. If this punch landed on Nye Tian, even if he didn't die, he would be heavily injured. Nye Tian narrowed his eyes, and astral soul wings appeared on his back. At the same time, he slashed out with his sword, causing sword shadows to howl as they pressed forward. You want to contend against my Army Destroyer magic armor with such strength? Ridiculous. Shadowflame Ruinous Star laughed coldly as he shattered the sword shadows with a single punch. His terrifying fist was akin to a mountain as it smashed towards Nyetian. Nyetian's silhouette flickered agilely as he evaded the attack of the army destroyer magic armor. Trying to escape? Shadowflame Ruinous Star laughed coldly as his fist missed. The gigantic army destroyer magic armor stomped heavily on the ground, causing the entire platform to tremble as though it was about to collapse. In the next instant, the army destroyer magic armor soared into the skies, aiming for Nyetian. Nyetian stood in the air, feeling the violent pressure bearing down on him. His eyes narrowed. Die! At this moment, Shadowflame Ruinous Star roared like thunder as he punched out with his fist. Instantly, tens of thousands of fist shadows appeared in the air, covering the entire space as they rushed towards Nyetian. Such a large-scale attack, there was no way for Nyetian to evade. He could only face it head-on. Saint Heaven-defying sword, Sky Sword reverses the sun. Nyetian frowned. His eyes narrowed as the sword intent in his body surged to the extreme. At the same time, the blood and chi in his body surged, fusing into the heavenly Tao formation, causing his sword intent to erupt with the strongest power. Boom! High up in the air, a blood-colored sword shadow appeared, blasting towards the countless black fist shadows. Boom! 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 In the next instant, the two extremely powerful forces collided together. Terrifying rumbling sounds rang out in the air as the terrifying power instantly spread out, wreaking havoc in the air, as though it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. The gazes of the crowd trembled, the shock in their hearts was indescribable. The terror of this battle had far exceeded their expectations. It seemed as though the battle wasn't as one-sided as they had imagined. Although Nyetian was at a disadvantage, he similarly displayed shocking combat prowess. Chapter 3109. Extremely brutal. Everyone watched the battle on the fighting platform with trembling eyes. They were extremely shocked. After a long while, the waves in the sky dissipated and Nyetian appeared. At this moment, Nyetian was standing coldly high up in the sky, covered in blood. However, his eyes shone with an extremely bright light. Fighting against the demon armor of the army destroyer had seriously injured him. Even though he had ignited his blood chi to increase the power of his sword will, he was still unable to face the demon armor of the army destroyer head-on. The demon armor of the army destroyer was not only strong in attack, its defense was even more terrifying. Even though Nyetian used the sun-defying sword, he was still unable to pose any threat to the demon armor of the army destroyer. Nyetian, is this all you've got? Shadowflame Ruinous Star's voice rang out. His voice was deep and filled with killing intent. Nyetian felt the impact of the power in the air and was shocked. The demon armor of the army destroyer's aura was terrifying. It was as if there were countless wild beasts running in the air. Ha ha ha! Go to hell! Then, Shadow Flame Destroyer laughed maniacally. The demon armor of the army destroyer moved again. It punched out with both fists, causing the air to tremble. Fight! Nyetian's eyes flickered and he roared. At this moment, he had no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. Only with great power could he carve out a path of survival for himself. Boom! Boom! The demon armor of the army destroyer punched out with both fists, causing the air to tremble violently. The terrifying power seemed to want to split the sky in half. Kaboom! Boom! In the void, a huge crack appeared. It was incomparably terrifying. Boom! Facing this fatal attack, Nyetian did not dare to be careless. His body shook and the 9 dragon veins in his body revolved crazily. Endless dragon chi gushed out and formed a sea of dragon chi behind him. In an instant, a giant red dragon was formed. Roar! The moment the giant red dragon appeared, it let out a deafening roar. In the next moment, the giant red dragon moved. It rolled out and raised its huge claws to meet the fists of the demon armor of the army destroyer. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, A thunderous rumble resounded in the sky. The heavens and the earth sank, and the dark clouds in the surroundings collapsed. The army destroyer demonic armor and the crimson dragon, this was a clash of absolute strength. It was extremely terrifying. Boom, boom, boom. Following that, violent energy gushed out in all directions, exploding in the air as if it wanted to destroy the heavens and earth. Following that, the crimson dragon retreated rapidly, its 2 dragon claws shattered. Nye Tion's expression was unsightly. The 9 dragon veins in his body started to circulate again. Dragon chi surged out and instantly restored the 2 dragon claws. Interesting. On the other side, Shadow Flame Ruinous Star smiled coldly. He hadn't expected that Nye Tion would actually be able to fight him with a dragon. However, in the next moment, the army destroyer demonic armor around his body released an even more terrifying power. A frightening dark energy appeared and condensed into a huge black blade in the air. Army Breaker Demon Saber. Shadow Flame Ruiner growled. The Army Breaker Demon armor reached out with both hands, grabbing the black saber. Nye Tion, this is our final battle. There's no need for me to hold back any longer. Shadow Flame Ruiner laughed maniacally as he slashed out with the Army Breaker Demon saber in his hands. A terrifying saber shadow appeared in the air. Rumble! Crack, crack, crack. In the next instant, the saber shadow slashed downwards, directly tearing the space apart. After which, the terrifying saber shadow slashed towards the crimson dragon, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Nye Tion's countenance sank. There was no longer any place for him to retreat. He could only meet the attack head-on. At this moment, he once again ignited his blood and chi, activating the 9 dragon veins, erupting forth with even greater strength. Roar! The crimson dragon roared as its gigantic body rushed over. Rumble! Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, the terrifying saber shadow slashed downwards. The gigantic body of the crimson dragon froze for a moment before exploding into pieces. Boundless draconic chi permeated the air, causing the spatial tear in the air to expand in size. The draconic chi had a weakening effect on spacetime. The spatial tear continued to expand. Nye Tion sensed that something was amiss. Astral wings appeared on his back as he frantically retreated. Pung! However, he was still a step too slow. His body was struck by the violent energy, and he was flung through the air, leaving a trail of blood behind him. This! The spectators stared at the scene in the air as their eyes trembled uncontrollably. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. Such a spectacular and tragic battle was beyond their imagination. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the air, the sounds of explosions rang out unceasingly. Everything was chaotic, and the sun couldn't be seen. After a long time, the spatial tear gradually returned to normal. The Army Breaker Demon saber in his hand stood in the air, resembling a devil god from hell. And on the other side, a blood-colored silhouette stood there. His entire body was drenched in blood, and there were countless wounds on his body. It was already a miracle that Nye Tion didn't die when he fought against the Army Breaker Demon armor head-on with his 9 dragon veins. But right now, he was also heavily injured. The blood and draconic chi in his body had been depleted, and even his sword intent was almost depleted. Only the energy from his constellation was still abundant. But his eyes were still sharp, without the slightest hint of fear. Instead, they were burning with fighting spirit. Nye Tion. Yulua looked at Nye Tion, her beautiful eyes flashing, and tears welled up in her eyes. This was the first time she had ever shed tears for a man. She didn't even know why she was crying. Oh no! Feng Shutong and the others looked at Nye Tion with nervous expressions, and their hearts were in their throats. The spectators looked at Nye Tion and the tragic scene, and they were all moved. Nye Tion's injuries are too severe. Just admit defeat. The Shadowfire Destroyer is too powerful. Nye Tion only has the strength of a stage 9 demi-saint. It's already a miracle that he could last this long. If the fight goes on, he'll die. Nye Tian is very talented, but his strength is too weak. If they were at the same level, the Shadowfire Destroyer would definitely not be his match. The spectators discussed and looked at Nye Tian with somber eyes, not knowing what the latter would do next. Nye Tian, is this all you've got? Aren't you very talented? Didn't you break the record of the Heaven's Choice platform? Didn't you kill me in the Doomsday Jungle? The Shadowfire Destroyer stood high in the sky and shouted, "Now, you piece of trash, fight back!" The angry roars showed how angry the Shadowfire Destroyer was at Nye Tian. However, at this moment, Nye Tian was standing there quietly, a strange light surging in his eyes. At this moment, something very strange was happening inside Nye Tian's body. The original opus of astral souls, which had been silent for a long time in the Primal Chaos original coffin, suddenly reacted at this moment. There were many astral souls in the original opus of astral souls, and Nye Tian had used most of them a long time ago. However, as his strength increased, the astral souls in the original opus of astral souls became useless. At this moment, the original opus of astral souls seemed to have sensed something and was actually trembling, as if it was being slowly opened by a mysterious force. Nye Tian felt the strange movement of the astral souls and could not help but be puzzled, not knowing what was going on. Chapter 31:10 Astral Dragon, a Taboo Astral Soul. Nye Tian couldn't help but to stiffen when he heard the excited voice of the Ghost Emperor. He had no idea what a forbidden astral soul was, but the Ghost Emperor was so excited at this moment. It seemed like it was an extremely terrifying thing. Moreover, at this moment, the original Star Soul Codex had a strange reaction, causing Nye Tian to feel an indescribable excitement. The original Codex of Astral Souls recorded all the astral souls in the Star River realm. But later on, Nye Tian discovered that the power of astral souls of the highest grade wasn't very strong. Hence, he didn't pay much attention to the original Codex of Astral Souls. But now, the Ghost Emperor actually said that the Shadowflame Destruction Astral Soul was a taboo astral soul. What did this mean exactly? A forbidden astral soul was also an astral soul? However, Nye Tian had never heard of a taboo astral soul in the original tome of Astral Souls. Nye Tian, this emperor doesn't have the time to explain too much to you. You only need to know that this fellow named Shadowflame Destroyer has an extremely powerful astral soul in his body. The Ghost Emperor was extremely excited. His eyes gleamed with a fiery light. Nye Tian's expression couldn't help but turn heavy when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. He asked in astonishment, "Could it be that the Shadowflame Broken Army has fused with a forbidden astral soul? Something like that." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "No wonder this guy can't die. Then what should I do now?" Nye Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. He was very sure that there must be some kind of connection between the forbidden astral souls and the original Codex of Astral Souls. There was even a possibility that the forbidden astral souls were also astral souls from the original Codex of Astral Souls. Use the power of the Shadowflame Army Destroyer to reactivate the original Star Soul Tome. The Ghost Emperor spoke in a heavy tone. "What do you mean?" Nye Tian frowned in confusion. From his point of view, the original Book of Star Souls had already been activated. Was there a need for it to be activated a second time? Unleash your full strength and force out the Army Destroyer Astral Soul from Shadowflame Ruinous Star. The Ghost Emperor didn't have time to explain. And Nye Tian nodded, and his eyes instantly became firm. The strange movement of the Star Soul Original Codex caused him to feel that the star energy within his body had become lively. Waves of mysterious energy surged within his body, causing his injured martial physique to begin to recover. "Nye Tian, you piece of trash! Fight back!" At this moment, Shadowflame Army Breaker saw that Nye Tian wasn't speaking, so he roared even more arrogantly. His gaze was cold and filled with killing intent. He looked at Nye Tian from afar as if he was looking at a dead man. In his eyes, Nye Tian was no different from a dead man. Nye Tian was severely injured at this time and no longer had the strength to fight back. Everyone looked at Nye Tian with strange expressions. Looks like Nye Tian is going to admit defeat. If this battle continues, he will definitely die. Yeah, there's no need to continue a battle where we can't even fight back. I don't think so. With the nature of the heavenly genius, he would never admit defeat. The crowd discussed, their eyes shining as they looked at Nye Tian, as if they were waiting for something to happen. At this moment, everyone was hoping that Nye Tian would bring out an even stronger trump card and explode with even greater power. Only then would he be worthy of the finals of the Heaven's Choice struggle. However, Nye Tian was completely suppressed by Shadow Flame Army Breaker. It was already a miracle that he could last until now. Hoping for him to explode with power was clearly unrealistic. Trash. Since you no longer have the strength to fight back, then die. At this moment, the coldness in Shadow Flame Army Breaker's eyes intensified. With a fierce roar, the huge Army Breaker demonic armor charged towards Nye Tian. Boom boom boom. The Army Breaker demonic armor's aura was boundless. As it charged forward, the heavens and earth trembled. Shadow Flame Army Breaker, since you want me to fight back, then I won't be polite. At this moment, Nye Tian's lips twitched as he spoke in a low voice. His entire body's aura was suddenly released, soaring to the heavens as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. Boom! Violent energy surged out, and waves of majestic dragon chi were released. It was extremely terrifying. In an instant, Nye Tian's aura rose to an unbelievable level. It was actually many times stronger than his previous aura. HM? Shadow Flame Army Breaker could not help but exclaim in surprise when he sensed Nye Tian's aura. How could he have imagined that Nye Tian would be able to explode with such terrifying power despite being so heavily injured? It was as if a wave of energy had suddenly erupted from within Nye Tian's body. So strong. The crowd was stunned by the scene before them, and they exclaimed in surprise. Their expectations had been fulfilled at this moment. Merging the power of the stars with the dragon chi. This is something I've never done before. Nye Tian's lips curled up and he smiled coldly. At this moment, he was merging the power of the stars with the dragon chi. Actually, he had tried to do this before, but to no avail. But now, the power of the stars seemed to have some sort of resonance with the original codex of astral souls. It became unusually active, and he was able to successfully merge it with the dragon chi. Boom! At this moment, the Army Breaker demon armor punched out. His fist was like a mountain, and when it came crashing down, the heavens and earth shook, and the space exploded. Bang! In the next instant, the Army Breaker demon armor's fist landed heavily on the Crimson Dragon. The space shook violently, and the two huge figures retreated at the same time. Shadow Flame Army Breaker steadied himself, and he was extremely surprised. The power of Nye Tian's dragon chi had actually increased by a few times, and he could face the Army Breaker demon armor head-on. Nye Tian really exploded. The crowd was stunned by the scene before them, and their eyes were burning with excitement as they exclaimed. Roar! High up in the sky, the Crimson Dragon roared angrily. The void trembled, and the heavens and earth trembled. Dark clouds rolled, as if doomsday had arrived. At this moment, the Crimson Dragon beneath Nye Tian's feet was actually 10,000 meters long. On its huge body, 3 types of power flowed simultaneously: chaotic flame, crimson lightning, and the power of the stars. After fusing with the power of the stars, the Crimson Dragon had already evolved into an astral dragon. Its aura and strength had a qualitative increase. Next, it's time to retaliate. Nye Tian stood on the back of the astral dragon, and a cold light flashed in his eyes as the corners of his lips curled up in a smile. Next, he wanted to force out the Army Breaker astral soul in Shadow Flame Army Breaker's body. Although he didn't know what the Army Breaker Astral Soul was exactly, he knew that it definitely had something to do with the original Codex of Astral Souls. Roar! At this moment, the astral dragon roared in rage, as a violent draconic might shook the heavens and earth. In the next instant, the silhouette of the astral dragon moved. Its gigantic body was like a bolt of lightning, flashing with a blinding light as it directly rushed towards the Army Breaker demon armor. Nia Tian is going to retaliate. The gazes of the crowd were fixed on the astral dragon, as their eyes trembled uncontrollably. Their nerves were stretched taut, and their hearts were in their throats. This was the first time Nia Tian retaliated since the start of the battle against the Army Breaker. Courting death. Shadow Flame Army Breaker stared at the gigantic dragon in the air as his countenance sank. Killing intent flashed in his eyes as he roared. After which, with an intention of his will, the Army Breaker demon armor madly galloped forward, causing rumbling sounds to echo in the air, as though there were tens of thousands of primordial beasts galloping forward. Chapter 31:11. Army Destroyer Star Soul Boom! Boom! High up in the sky, the Army Destroyer demonic armor and the Star Dragon had gone berserk. They were like giant beasts, bursting with destructive power. Army Destroyer demonic blade kill! Shadow Flame Destroyer roared. The huge Army Destroyer demonic blade slashed down from the sky. A blade shadow that was tens of thousands of meters long appeared. Wherever the blade shadow passed, a terrible crack appeared in the space. Under the influence of the dragon chi, the space became much weaker. It could not withstand the violent attack of the Army Destroyer demonic blade. Roar! Almost at the same time, the Star Dragon roared angrily. The whole world became small at this moment, as if it was being trampled under the feet of a giant dragon. Buzz! The two huge forces slowly approached each other. Under the huge pressure, the void groaned, as if it would collapse in the next moment. The next moment, the two behemoths finally collided head-on. Under countless gazes, the mountain-like Army Destroyer demonic blade bombarded the body of the Star Dragon. Boom! The void shook, and suddenly, a terrifying wave that could be seen with the naked eye surged out. It formed a terrible ripple in the void, and everywhere it passed, the world became chaotic. Boom, boom, boom. In the space, terrible roars sounded continuously. The two terrible forces collided and resisted each other, but because they were too strong, they could not destroy each other in an instant. It became a stalemate. Everyone looked at this scene, and their eyes trembled violently. They all gasped, not knowing how to express the shock in their hearts. Nia Tian's strong counterattack had already made them extremely excited, but the confrontation in the sky was simply unbelievable. At this time, in the distant sky, several pairs of eyes were looking at the battle platform with different expressions. Nia Tian, you really amaze me. Heaven's Chosen One's beautiful eyes twinkled. Her pretty face was as calm as an ancient well, and no one could tell whether she was happy or angry. On the other side, the expressions of the people of Juying Palace were very ugly. Their eyes were trembling, and they were obviously very worried. In particular, the Juying Palace master, Ing Qianyu, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. There was a strange light in his eyes, as if he was worried about something. Shadow Flame Army Destroyer, don't ever use the power of the Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Ing Qianyu's eyes narrowed as he silently spoke in his heart. If the Shadow Flame Army Destroyer Astral Soul didn't activate the Army Destroyer Astral Soul, he would at most lose this battle. But if he were to use the Army Destroyer Star Soul, it would be the same as gifting it to Nia Tian. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. On the fighting platform, the terrifying confrontation of power continued. Violent air waves surged in the void, and the heavens and earth were in chaos. Nia Tian, you are no match for me. Shadow Flame Ruinous Star controlled the Army Destroyer magic armor and roared furiously. However, his expression was tense and extremely ugly. He didn't expect Nye Tion's strength to suddenly soar to such an extent. In a head-on clash of absolute strength, Shadowflame Ruinous Star felt an immense pressure. Shadowflame Army Breaker, you can't hold on any longer. I've said it before, if I can kill you once, I can kill you a second time. Even if you have 100 lives, or even 1,000 lives, you are still no match for me. Nye Tianling laughed in reply, his low and deep voice resounding in Shadowflame Ruinous Star's ears like a clap of thunder. Boom! Roar! Following which, Nye Tion's body trembled as the astral dragon beneath his feet roared in rage. Draconic chi surged, and a towering draconic might was released, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Boom! Pung pung pung! In the next instant, a terrifying explosion rang out in the void. The army destroyer Demonic Saber was actually unable to withstand the impact of the draconic chi, and directly shattered in the air. This Shadowflame Ruinous Star sensed that something was amiss. His countenance abruptly changed as he screamed in terror. Shadowflame Army Breaker, you're dead for sure. Following which, Nye Tion's voice rang out once more, reverberating through the air. Shadowflame Army Breaker, he's really going to lose. The eyes of the spectators trembled violently as they stared at this scene. Who would have thought that Nye Tion, who was originally in a disadvantageous position, would actually reverse the situation in the blink of an eye? Shadowflame Army Breaker retreated repeatedly. Evidently, he was no longer able to face Nye Tion head-on. Shadowflame Army Breaker's demonic armor was flung back over 10,000 meters. His eyes trembled as hesitation flickered in his eyes, as though he was contemplating something, unable to make a decision. Shadowflame Army Breaker, stabilize your chi. You absolutely must not use your Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Qianyu stared at Shadowflame Army Breaker as his eyes trembled. Evidently, he was extremely nervous. If it wasn't for the Heaven's Choice Saint Envoy being present, he would definitely have spoken up. Shadowflame Army Breaker, is this all you've got? Trash, why don't you retaliate? And at this moment, in the air above the platform, Nye Tion's voice rang out, sharp and low. These were the words Shadowflame Army Breaker had shouted earlier. Now that it was being shouted out by Nye Tion, it sounded even more like mockery. Every single sentence, every single word, was akin to a steel needle, heavily piercing into Shadowflame Army Breaker's heart. Nye Tion. At this moment, Shadowflame Army Breaker finally couldn't endure it any longer. With an explosive roar, his eyes shone with a scarlet light as his countenance contorted with malevolence, akin to that of a ferocious beast. At this moment, he couldn't endure it any longer. Be enraged, be enraged. Release the power of your Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Nye Tion's gaze trembled as his heart burned with passion. He was using words to provoke Shadowflame Army Breaker into using his Army Destroyer Astral Soul. You forced me to do this. You're dead for sure. The ferocity in Shadowflame Army Breaker's eyes instantly reached an extreme. He howled like a wolf, and after which, astral runes appeared around his body, gushing forth like raging waves, incomparably terrifying. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The astral runes were like raging waves crashing into the air, after which they congregated in the air, forming a gigantic runic diagram that radiated an incomparably majestic energy. Nye Tion stared at the gigantic runic diagram as his eyes involuntarily narrowed. His countenance was filled with incomparable shock. From the runic diagram, he could sense an extremely familiar aura. It was the aura of an astral soul. He was extremely certain that this gigantic runic diagram was an astral soul. However, compared to the astral souls that appeared in the original codex, this astral soul was even more intricate, complex, and majestic. It was as though every single astral rune contained an inexhaustible amount of energy. Army Destroyer Astral Soul. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, filled with shock and excitement. Even his voice was trembling as he exclaimed, "Army Destroyer Astral Soul, it's truly the Army Destroyer Astral Soul." He was extremely certain that the runic diagram that Shadowflame Army Breaker released was indeed the Army Destroyer Astral Soul. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the legendary Forbidden Astral Soul would actually appear in this world. "Nye Tian, you're dead for sure." And after the Shadowflame Army Breaker released his Army Destroyer Astral Soul, his aura surged several times over. His eyes shone with a blood-red killing intent as he roared in a low voice. At this moment, Nye Tian finally reacted, but his eyes were trembling. Chapter 31:15. Primal Star Spirit. As soon as Nye Tian spoke, the entire place fell silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. Their expressions were clearly saying, "Are you crazy?" In everyone's eyes, for Nye Tian to reject the invitation after what the Heaven's Choice Venerable had said was definitely the actions of a madman. The crowd could not understand what Nye Tian was thinking. Why would he reject such a good opportunity? He believed that any rational person present would not reject the invitation. If Nye Tian followed the Heaven's Choice Venerable into the Saint's world, with his status as a Star Chief and Saint, his starting point would be very high. In the future, he would not be any weaker than the geniuses of the Saint's world. But Nye Tian rejected it without hesitation, as if to him, the opportunity in front of him was as cheap as cabbages that could be thrown away. The Heaven's Choice Venerable looked at Nye Tian, her beautiful eyes twinkling. She seemed to be thinking about something and did not say anything. At this moment, the Heaven's Choice Venerable stepped forward and stared fiercely at Nye Tian, growling, "Nye Tian, the Venerable has personally invited you to join the Heaven's Choice Venerable and enter the Saint's world. Don't be unappreciative." "Venerable Heaven's Choice Venerable, so what if I'm unappreciative?" Nye Tian looked at the Heaven's Choice Venerable and smiled. "I'll give up my status as a Star Chief and Saint. What's wrong with that?" "You." The Heaven's Choice Venerable's face darkened and his eyebrows rose. He was clearly furious, but did not know what to say. Nye Tian was right. He did have the right to give up his status as a Star Chief. The Star Chief had the right to join the Heaven's Choice Venerable, but he also had the right to give up his status. Even if the Heaven's Choice Venerable invited him, there was nothing wrong with Nye Tian rejecting him. Everyone looked at Nye Tian with complicated expressions. They had not expected things to develop to this point. Is Nye Tian a fool or a madman? He actually gave up such a good opportunity, and offended the Heaven's Choice Venerable and the Heaven's Choice Venerable. Why? I really don't know what Nye Tian is thinking. If he stays here, will the Juying Palace Master let him go? I don't think there are many experts here who can fight against the Juying Temple Master. Nye Tian is courting death by refusing the Heaven's Chosen Venerable. Even if the Heaven's Choice Venerable doesn't kill him, he's going to die. What an idiot! The crowd discussed in low voices. They looked at Nye Tian's Tian with suspicion. The crowd, which had been cheering for Nye Tian just a moment ago, was now looking down on him. Venerable, 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 venade, venerable, Tian, 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 venerable, 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 Tian as venerable had, venerable, 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 Tian star, venerable, venerable was. Nye Tian guessed that the reason why the Heaven's Chosen One wanted him to join the Heaven's Chosen One so urgently was not simple. Perhaps Cher had something to do with it, but Nye Tian must have something to do with it as well. Vaguely, Nye Tian smelled a conspiracy coming from the Heaven's Chosen Venerable. Nye Tian, since you don't want to join Heaven's Choice, I won't force you. At this moment, the Heaven's Chosen One finally spoke. He looked at Ng Qianyu and the others with a strange gaze, then his gaze landed on Nye Tian. You're on your own. Thank you, Heaven's Chosen One, for your reminder. Nye Tian smiled calmly. Of course, he knew that once Heaven's choice came to an end, he would have to face the threat of a powerful opponent. Right now, he was already thinking about how to leave. In Qianyu, Huangshu Evil, and the others heaved a long sigh of relief when they saw that Nie Tian didn't join Heaven's choice. Of course, they hoped that Nie Tian would stay. After all, Nie Tian had star origin stones on him. Next, the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen Envoy began to evaluate the results of the other Heaven's Chosen Ones. Then, they would pick the top 12, the 12 Heaven's Chosen Stars. All the Heaven's Chosen Stars had the right to join Heaven's choice. They would follow the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen One and enter the sacred world. The selection of the 12 Heaven's Chosen Stars was very cautious. It would take 3 days. During these 3 days, Nie Tian would be safe. For the next 3 days, Nie Tian was prepared to study the Army Destroyer Star Soul. He came to the side of Feng Shutong and the others and spoke with them for a while. Then, he went to a quiet place. Before the Heaven's Chosen One and the Heaven's Chosen One left, no matter how arrogant Ying Qianyu and the others were, they wouldn't dare to act against Nie Tian. Nie Tian sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. His divine sense entered the primal chaos origin coffin. At this moment, the primal chaos origin coffin was extremely quiet. The 9-level primal chaos beast was sealed by the Heaven's Chosen One, causing the primal chaos origin coffin to appear empty. Original Codex of Astral Souls. With a thought from Nie Tian, the original Codex of Astral Souls appeared. It floated in mid-air and slowly floated in front of him. Nie Tian drew in a deep breath and slowly opened the original Codex of Astral Souls. Once again, he saw the Army Destroyer Star Soul. Sensing the aura of the Army Destroyer Star Soul, his eyes involuntarily trembled. The Army Destroyer Astral Soul, when compared to the previous astral souls, had the same astral aura. However, this astral soul was even more profound and vast, giving off a feeling of boundlessness. It was as though each and every one of the astral runes contained the entire starry sky. What tier is the Army Destroyer Star Soul exactly? It's actually so powerful. Nie Tian frowned as he mumbled. Being able to sense the Army Destroyer Star Soul at such a close distance allowed him to understand how powerful it was. He simply didn't dare to believe that such a terrifying astral soul actually existed in this world. After which, Nie Tian tried to open the next page of the original Codex of Astral Souls. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't open it. It was as though the original Codex of Astral Souls was sealed by some sort of energy. Nie Tian, the original Codex of Astral Souls, has already been opened. The previous Astral Souls are no longer present. If you want to open the second page, you have to use a primeval Astral Soul. Just when Nie Tian was filled with bewilderment, the voice of the Ghost Emperor rang out. Primeval Astral Soul? Nie Tian froze as he asked in astonishment, "What is a primeval astral soul?" Before this, the Ghost Emperor spoke of a taboo astral soul. Now, he spoke of a primeval astral soul. What did this mean? Primeval astral souls are taboo astral souls. The Ghost Emperor fell silent for a moment before continuing. It's rumored that when an astral origin stone was born, many primeval astral souls would be born together with it. Those primeval astral souls are the very first astral souls. All the astral souls in the original Codex of Astral Souls originated from these primeval astral souls. Because the astral soul of the astral stone is too powerful, it's also known as a taboo astral soul.